Hello. Hi 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 hi. Okay, I'll stop. That's me trying to get my energy up because God knows it's a Monday. Welcome. It's another day, another stream in fascist America. Just one of the Americas. What is commonly referred to in shorthand as the United States of America, Stolen Land, Turtle Island, but also it often misconstrues this idea that there are not other Americas. So, just getting that out there. Hello, Night Love. Welcome, welcome. How did your exam go? Also, I know it's like pretty late for you. Thank you for tuning in, but do take care of yourself. I will reiterate these annoying things. That's okay. You don't have to apologize for anything. I'm glad that you were able to do what you needed to do for exams. That's very important. We did watch that song by Stromae, and I have greatly enjoyed Stromae's art. So I was very pleased when you shared that music video. We watched it. Just really exceptional. Your exams went quite good for now. That's great. Except for one. I watched the VOD, but did the VOD cut it out? I surprisingly, from one person, they said, like, on stream during the song, because I know that you mentioned that uh, there could have been a copyright happening and that their screen went dark. But for everyone else, it was fine. I think you misunderstood the song. Upon like reviewing the VOD, because sometimes I do this just as I'm clipping things, I think you're right. Because I was like partially listening and not. Because it seemed like it was about his mother and people like slandering his mother. And that it was actually like a way to give her the type of funeral and like honor that she deserved. But this is the problem of like carrying on conversations with the chat and not like pausing enough. So that's on me. Do you feel like that's what it was about? That like people are unfairly talking about her? I didn't really engage with like the meaning of the music video as much, which maybe I should rewatch it on a stream to actually do that because the art is really incredible. So that's on me. But I do really enjoy Stromae's art. Just always a fashion icon as well. If you are wanting to rewatch it at some point, he's playing multiple roles through the song. Oh, I didn't notice that. Okay, yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. We'll rewatch it where I will engage more critically with it. Sorry about that. I was very excited to watch and can just get distracted. But we will watch again. Especially looking for those extra rolls, even going back and like clipping some things. I didn't even notice that. So you're right. I did miss a lot of stuff. The different ways people see his mother, who is was yeah, that's what I gathered. Is that like they're talking about her in that way, and it's like, how do you? What are you even talking about? People don't know what they're talking about. Which also like power to sex workers. Like sex work is not easy, and many people are. Now, this isn't for like the story for everyone, but many people resort to sex work because they have limited options. And the fact that like she took care of him and that he was like, you don't understand what she went through and how she cared about me and other people. He differentiates the roles with the chorus. Oh, okay. Yeah. We'll rewatch it. I'll be more mindful about it this time, I promise. Okay. Welcome to whatever this is, an attempt at providing education, advocacy, and a little common sense in this digital wasteland. I'm Aubri Devashrayee. And I do make mistakes, as we are seeing. I'm trying to be better about like correcting things, like if I'm doing or saying something that's untoward or I don't like how it like comes off or I'm misunderstanding something. Like in real time, that's ideal, like as I think we should be doing in real life, but also in follow-up streams. So he doesn't over-exaggerate the point of view of each character. Okay. I love that. I mostly was like listening to it just on like the, as you can tell, a very, very surface level. With like just like the music itself, which was incredible. Like I really like the harpsichord in that. Errare humanus est. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So today I did want to catch up on current events, things that are happening, get some headlines in there, but with everything that is going on, I do think we need some more lighthearted fare that we are engaging with. For the past few streams, I was wanting to watch a couple of videos, one on um decolonizing Marx. I mean, the video is called Decolonization via a Marxist lens, but also I think it will be helpful in like decolonizing Marxist thought itself, which is important, by Vijay Prashad. And then also there is this like debate or conversation that is happening with a communist professor and a reactionary socialist that I think is very important for engaging in the reading, since we're reading the Manifesto of the Communist Party, colloquially referred to as the Communist Manifesto. Latin for errors are human, right? Yeah, it seems like the song has a very powerful message, so that's on me for not engaging with that as much. But we will rewatch it, I promise. Because I do appreciate the recommendation, especially with like such important messaging. So, I will be more mindful as we are watching it this time around. Okay, so before we get into the headlines, as we normally do with the stream, let's watch a humorous video. This is episode 4 of the second season of A Very Fatal Murder, as if there's any other kind of murder. And the episode name is Where It Happened and Where It Didn't. On the last episode that we watched, which was episode 3, I think it was like a few streams ago. We haven't been watching them exactly in chronological order. But they ended essentially on like the podcast host and the killer, who is also this billionaire who killed his wife, essentially like hitting it off on topics that they want to talk about. And so I wouldn't be surprised if they become friends and the podcaster continues to be part of the problem, as we saw in the last season. So let's give this a watch. I'll also speed it up just a tad.
Generous humanitarian, natural beauty, philanthropist of the year 2018. That was Liana Reed when she was alive. But now, she was dead.
Thousands lined the streets today to attend the funeral of Liana Choi Reed.
What makes watching someone like Liana die grab our attention? Perhaps seeing a perfect woman cut down in the prime of her life reminds us of our own fragility.
Liana Choi Reed was named one of the most beautiful people of 2018, but even that couldn't guarantee her an open casket.
Perhaps it forces us to reflect on what they could have done on this earth had they lived longer and had the chance.
I told my daughter not to marry a billionaire murderer. But Liana, when she set her mind to something...
Or perhaps
So he was already known to be a billionaire? I mean, a murderer, that is? Billionaire, murderer. I mean,
hello, fellow.
These are already the same thing. So even if he didn't have like one particular case of like being known as a murderer, essentially billionaires just are murderers with all of the extraction and wages that they are siphoning, absorbing, and also with the continuing colonization that they engage in. Most of them literally invested in world genocides. So
graduates, my name is Liana Choi Reed.
This was Liana Choi Reed delivering a commencement at Harvard, her alma mater, just a few years ago. Listening now is haunting, to say the least.
Life may feel like it's strangling you sometimes, but when it does, just breathe. Doesn't that feel good?
Maybe if she had listened to her own advice, she'd still be here. Maybe she was too smart for her own good.
Oh my God. Just blaming her for being murdered. Maybe if she had just tried breathing, she would still be here. Okay. The victim blaming is insane. I'm not mad or anything, just correcting you on the meaning because we can't always understand everything on the first time, especially when it's not in our first language. No, I'm not thinking that you're upset. And I'm also not upset by you bringing it up because I also, like, as I was watching it back, like that part in particular, I was like, oh, yeah, this, like, I really only engaged with, like, the aesthetics, like the visuals, and, like, barely, like, the music itself. So I don't feel like that's fair to you. And I do want to do right by not only you, but also the song. So yeah, we're all good, but I do want to, like, I love being able to break down a lot of these complexities in art. So yeah, and with it not being in my first language, barely speaking any sort of French, clearly. Yeah.
Her so perfect. And if she really was so perfect, why would Milo kill her?
The blaming. The victim blaming is insane in this. So, of course, they have, of course, they've become friends at this point. Oui, baguette. Exactly. Oui, croissant.
The search for Liana Choi Reed's killer has come to an end.
I'm like, I grew up doing ballet. What is like pas de chat? That's something, which is just step of the cat. Use that in, is that common phraseology?
Order in the court! Milo Reed has defied his house arrest terms and is currently driving his spaceship around Los Angeles.
How could Liana be dead if none of us are even really alive?
Well, it's so true. The question I kept asking myself when it came to the Milo Reed case was, why would Milo Reed kill Liana? She had the brain of a genius and the body of a model. She had fashion, class, personality. She was sober, but not in an annoying way. Was killing someone so perfect even possible?
She was sober, but not in an annoying way. Is crazy.
Milo Reed.
You are receiving a call from Milo Reed Home Penitentiary in Bali.
David, I wish you were here. I'm drinking a coconut.
Milo had gotten himself out of...
So he has home penitentiaries in, like, all of these vacation spots, supposedly. Really just places that have been deeply colonized and are continuing the colonization through tourism. Because he was previously in Hawaii, and now he's at a different home penitentiary, and it's in Bali. So, the French YouTuber who made a meme in French, which is, "You're sad? Stop it." Stop that! Especially with, like, the French attitude, a lot of the time is kind of like life is misery, essentially. And it's like, yeah, that's just like when things go wrong, that's kind of expected, because that's life. You're dead. Stop it. Exactly. You know, if you just kept breathing, like even if you did have all of these wounds, like even if you were strangled by this drone that this billionaire bought and trained to strangle you, like maybe you should have just kept breathing is so wild.
North American house arrest by threatening to kill himself repeatedly to his guards. But there was no time to dwell on his emotional state. This was about Liana.
Milo, that's awesome. But I have a question. How did you first know you loved Liana?
Well, it was easy to love Liana. It was love at first sight. She was beautiful, easy to talk to. She was smart and sophisticated. And the only...
Hi, David.
Hi, Harmony.
That's Milo's mistress, Harmony. She's so fun. According to police, on the night of January 5th,
She's so
between
fun.
1:04 and 1:17 a.m., Milo...
Yeah, they're friends now. That's why. That's why it's taking this turn. But also the fact that, like, oh, what is the... This is like a concept of like motive that often gets overemphasized, especially in like crime dramas, like TV shows, but podcasts and stuff. It's like, while motive is important, it's like sometimes there isn't a great motive for people to be just killing someone, especially when it comes to like the misogyny that is involved with like this crime in particular, but like just in general. Like why are women, people who are presenting femme, why are queer people, why are especially like as you have these intersections of marginalization, like particularly with like indigenous women and black women, like why are people disproportionately killed? Well, maybe it's because of these harmful structures. Who can't think with 50 bullets in your and yeah, exactly.
Psychedelic mushrooms, cocaine.
Like maybe you should have thought through that.
Spending several hours trying to connect spiritually.
You weren't critically engaging. You weren't critically thinking about
a wireless
that.
strangulation drone, chased Liana into the servants' district and strangled her to death. He then
The
located her
servants'
body, dragged her to the
district.
laundry facility in the servants' quarters,
They
and
have a
spit on her,
district.
supposedly covering her in his DNA. But to find out what really happened to Liana, I needed to recreate the night Milo supposedly murdered her, from his perspective. I started by first taking a heavy dose of Milo's hallucinogenic drug concoction and returning to the scene of the crime.
Oh my, because that's going to
After
lead to
Liana's death, the
great
wing of the Reed home
reporting
where Liana
based
was
in
murdered had been hermetically
reality
sealed.
and
The laundry
facts.
facility, as well as all the evidence, all of Milo's DNA, even Liana's dead body, were left exactly how they were the night of the slaying. But as I looked down at Liana's body, something didn't make sense.
Oh my God, she's breathtaking.
She still looked beautiful and smart, even months after dying.
And
Why would anyone want to do this to
smart.
someone so perfect? At this point, I
Jesus.
should also mention that in order to really get inside Milo's head, I started to force myself
What does
to
that
fall in
even
love with Liana
mean?
earlier that day. And as I'm sure you can imagine, it was much easier than I thought.
So gorgeous. Look at her dance. She's an angel.
To start, I had watched hours of footage from her funeral
God.
coverage, her and Milo's wedding tape, and pretty much any YouTube video I could find of her.
Thank you, everyone, for watching. I'm Liana Choi Reed. If you'd like to learn more, listen to my podcast on human rights violations in Ghana.
Oh my God. Now that I had fallen absolutely head over heels for her, it was time to find out, could someone who was totally in love with Liana and high out of his mind really kill her? Dressed up like a Swiss billionaire and thinking about planes, I grabbed some more weed gummies from the complimentary drug buckets Milo placed out for guests and entered the hermetically sealed scene of the crime at 1:07 a.m.,
Complimentary
just like
drug
Milo had.
buckets.
40 minutes later, Sydney recorded this.
Okay, so there are some other podcasters at the scene, and David is not happy.
Lights, camera, strangled. That was the story of Liana Choi Reed.
Get out.
Hey man, you gotta fill out your 19B22, the LA County Crime Scene Podcaster permit. We paid our $70. We're
She's
not
really
paying.
strong neurons to still be smart after 3 months.
After politely
Yeah,
asking bystanders to
exactly.
leave, I got to work disproving that Milo killed Liana.
While
Considering how
dead,
hard it
she
was to
was
see
just
through all
like
my tears,
projecting
murdering someone in
out
this state of mind seemed nearly
feces
impossible.
I get it now.
on her
I
death.
understand perfectly.
And
What do you understand?
The strangulation
these systems of
drone is
oppression she
God.
wanted
We're
to
all
talk
God.
about.
Oh, it's so beautiful.
What about the murder, David?
Why are you so obsessed with murder, man? You're freaking me out. You're freaking me out.
When it came to disproving Milo murdered Liana, I was killing it. In every dimension I entered, I disproved the prosecution's story. In many ways, I had disproved that murder was even possible. I disproved it in the past, the present, and the future.
You're okay. Everything's fine. Just try to stay focused on
Okay.
She's just so beautiful. I
Jeez.
can't believe she's dead. Who would do this? Who? Did you kill her?
What? No. David, put the iron down.
I'm sorry.
David, stop it! David, stop!
After chasing
Jeez.
Sydney around for a while, then getting tangled up in a drying rack and falling to the floor, I figured it was time to call it a night. But as I sat there, half naked, eating a leftover Hot Pocket that had also been hermetically sealed in the room, it hit me. If Milo didn't kill Liana, who did? And where was all my skin?
Oh,
A Very Fatal Murder is brought to you by
it's
Cleanup,
very
the
high.
new subscription service that sends someone to your house every week to pick up your garbage. For just $12.99 a month, you can finally get rid of all that clutter. Just place your garbage in a box, roll it outside, and we'll take care of the rest. Getting rid of all your trash has never been so easy, thanks to cleanup. Since I'd first learned of Liana's death, something
Rather
had been
than just
bothering me. It was the kind of thing that wakes you up in the middle of the
garbage
night in a
services
cold
from the
sweat,
city.
confused. The kind of thing that stops you in your tracks and leaves you wondering just what in the hell is going on here. I'd recently learned that these things I'd been experiencing were called earthquakes, and it wasn't just me experiencing them. They seemed to happen almost every day here in Los Angeles, and the big one was coming. But could they tell me anything about this case? It turns out earthquakes are a lot like metaphors. They're interesting, and I like them. But the deeper you get into one, the scarier it becomes. Would it ever end? Or would there be another one following right behind? Earthquakes are a lot like murder in that regard. They can strike at any minute, and usually somebody ends up dead. But this particular seismic wave, the murder of Liana Choi Reed and the aftershock of Milo Reed's arrest, was especially
I would say so.
because it was beginning to
That's a
expose the
guess
fault lines
in what
in the
happens
justice
with
system,
murder.
and I was about to crack them wide open.
Ken, you have
I
to
think
put me on
he's
the
just
stand.
not
The
even
day after I reenacted
going
Liana's
to
murder
get
and
the
exonerated
trash.
Milo, I
Yeah, he's
contacted
probably
Ken
gonna
Whitten, Milo's defense attorney. He was
have
right
the
in the middle of throwing
billionaire
darts at a picture of Liana's face when I found him in the Folks
create
Criminal
a
Justice Center.
drone that
David
does
Pascal,
that
OPR
instead.
podcaster and forensic expert.
Ah, yes, David.
It's just a
Walk with me.
scam.
If you've been keeping up with the podcast, you might remember that 2 episodes ago, I mentioned that the justice system was like a body, with bones, skin, and arms. But what I didn't mention was that the justice system is a woman, and the Foltz is her womb.
Yeah,
day,
or
I
that
could
the
feel an
joke
amazing breakthrough
is
being born. An all-lady justice
like someone is already having their trash be taken out and like, oh, you can have this additional thing.
had to do was push.
Okay, so the official timeline the police released said that Milo murdered his wife between 1:04 and 1:17 a.m. But I didn't kill anyone that night. And if Milo murdered, shouldn't have I? Plus, after I saw Liana, the only thing I felt was more love for her, not less.
As Ken and I walked down the long womb of the justice system, I told him everything that I'd done to prove Milo innocent. The drugs, the reenactment, the love I had for Liana.
She was a podcaster. A podcaster. How perfect is that? Like, what are the odds? We're both podcasters? She's too perfect to be dead. I mean, maybe she's not even dead, you know? Have you even looked into that?
I should mention right now that while high on drugs, I came up with a lot of really good ideas about what could have happened to Liana. And I should also mention that I was wearing tap shoes to sort of create a unique soundscape. If they could just let me on the stand, I knew I could convince a jury.
And that's why I think the octopus did it.
I was, legally speaking, tipping a scale.
What?
Ken said they weren't at the point of interviewing witnesses.
It is
Objection.
just
I said
so
I'd wait.
absurd.
Ken said they'd have to get through evidence first. Double objection. I could be entered in as evidence. To be honest, I loved the rush, and I could have done this for hours. But then, something came up.
David, this is all.
Also, that last part with his tapping, it sounded like he was doing, like, having done some tapping. I'm not going to claim to be a great tapper, but I'm okay at, like, very basic tap stuff. And sounded like he was doing like actual steps, not just like a random person walking with taps on their shoes, because there is a difference. And then especially at the end of like that's like a specific type of step too. So maybe he learned some things while he was doing this.
But I gotta go.
Ooh, where? To pay off a witness? Kill a guy? I can come.
No, just an interview with one of these podcasts. It's called The Murder Bitches. Should be fun.
What? Now, I know what you're thinking. Why was Ken Whitten wasting his time doing a podcast instead of talking to me while Milo Reed was rotting in house arrest? Ken Whitten was apparently more obsessed with fame, his LA lifestyle, the paparazzo, and sucking up to the academy than actually doing his job. As I watched Ken lead through the birth canal of the United States legal system, I couldn't help but think that I had just witnessed a miscarriage of justice. His self-obsession, his disregard for the evidence
that
was
phrasing.
killing my baby. The case of Milo Reed.
Also, the fact that he's on the Murder Bitches podcast, which is like a sister podcast, essentially, of this one. Yeah, no worries. Thanks for
Next
being
time
here.
on A Very Fatal Murder.
You are receiving
We'll
a call from
rewatch
Milo Reed Home Penitentiary
the
in
song on
outer
Friday.
space.
David, I'm on the moon.
And I can't wait to see what you all accomplish because I
Bye. Thank you for being here.
According to my
Good luck with
autopsy,
everything.
she choked on a microphone?
Oh, whoops, sorry, I left that in there.
A Very Fatal Murder is brought to you by me, David Pascal, and Onion Public Radio. Visit our website to take a virtual tour of the crime scene and test out your own theories about how Liana might have died, all in beautiful 4K VR. And use the hashtag #JusticeForMilo to tweet out your theories about why you think Milo is such a great guy. Special thanks to Perkins Investigative Services for round-the-clock surveillance of the
Stop
victim's family.
supporting him.
And finally, a very special thanks to my personal assistant, Sydney, who's been killing it so hard lately, she's a true fucking rock star, future CEO. So look out. One day she might even be my boss.
Well, him laughing at that, laughing at the prospect. Okay. They'll probably say some pithy thing at the end of reading that, like, news, the paper, the magazine of the Onion, that it is a podcast you can read. That's usually how they end. Okay. So let's get into the headlines to get this shit over with. But let's hear from Amy Goodman about what's going on in the world.
Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Officials in Tehran say they've reached a memorandum of understanding with the United States to end fighting on all fronts in a preliminary peace deal to be signed next Friday. Iran's deputy foreign minister said on Iranian television that the agreement includes a ceasefire in Lebanon, where Israeli forces occupy about a fifth of Lebanese territory and continue to launch airstrikes. The deal extends the ceasefire by 60 days, creating a window for negotiations on other issues, including the future of Iran's nuclear program and the lifting of U.S. sanctions.
Hoisted
on
by
Sunday,
their own
President Trump
petard.
wrote on his Truth Social platform, quote, I hereby fully authorize the toll-free opening of the Strait of Hormuz and simultaneously herewith authorize the immediate removal of the United States naval blockade, unquote. Trump went on to write, quote, ships of the world, start your engines, let the oil flow, unquote. After headlines, we'll get the latest on negotiations to end the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran. We'll speak with Jeremy Scahill of Dropsite News. In Lebanon, Israeli strikes on Beirut's southern suburbs killed at least 3 people and wounded 15 others Sunday. Witnesses said 2 missiles slammed into an apartment building, causing severe damage to nearby homes and businesses, in what Israel's military claim was a precise strike on a Hezbollah command center.
We stayed here and didn't flee throughout the whole year. We are not afraid. We will not leave our home no matter what happens. But today we didn't expect this targeting to happen. The children have been terrified, naturally. We will never leave, and whatever happens, happens.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the bombings came in response to Hezbollah attacks on northern Israel. That drew a rare public rebuke from President Trump, who wrote on social media the attack, quote, should not have happened, particularly on a special day when we're so close to a peace deal with Iran, unquote. Meanwhile, Israel's defense minister, Israel Katz, has promised his forces will remain deployed in southern Lebanon, parts of Syria, and much of the Gaza Strip indefinitely. In Gaza, Israel continues to carry out deadly attacks on Palestinians despite the U.S.-brokered so-called ceasefire signed by Israel in October. Earlier today, a Palestinian woman was killed in an Israeli strike in the central Gaza Strip. That followed the killings of at least 6 Palestinians Sunday and 3 on Saturday. The Palestinian Health Ministry reports the confirmed total death toll in Gaza since October 7, 2023, has surpassed 73,000 people. Nearly 175,000 injuries have been reported. In Britain,
that number is so fucking low. These are the ones that have been reported, not people who have just been, what is the word? That there was a specific word that people were using of like them just like disintegrating their bodies because of these explosives, and that there are so many people who are buried under the rubble and people that are not being reported on, that it's like, that is such a conservative number. It is insane. It's like, and this just continues, like just showing, like, I know that Israel is this aircraft carrier for the United States, but like how the U.S. refuses to put any sort of restraint on Israeli aggression. It's like they don't actually care. The only reason Trump said that post is because he realizes there's so much pressure building, particularly from his side, from his own base, on gas prices and actually having a deal be made with Iran, that he was like, oh, this looks bad for me. That's what he is concerned about. But yeah, it's like there is just this endless thirst for blood and violence and death, not only from the Israeli genocidal state and all of its policies, but also with the U.S. and like supposedly like saying like, oh, we care about a ceasefire here, but like completely ignoring that there have been ceasefires actually negotiated that have not been honored. So like, what the fuck?
4 Palestine Action activists have been sentenced as terrorists over their involvement in a 2024 protest and raid on a factory operated by one of Israel's largest arms manufacturers, Elbit. This is the first time in Britain a judge has issued terrorism sentencing enhancements on people who were not actually convicted of terrorism. In May, the 4 activists were found guilty of smashing up Elbit military equipment. Their prison sentences range from 4 to over 7 years. They must also legally register to a law enforcement terrorist surveillance system for 15 years following their release from prison.
This is what we call direct action. Like, directly acting against the forces that are causing harm. These people are heroes, to be clear, for actually going in and doing what they need to do and actually showing how resistance can make a difference. That, like, people have to take power into their own hands. We, the people, have to take power into our own hands with what is going on in the world when we have all of these nation states and these leaders that are complicit, actively pursuing genocide, committing genocide that is just unconscionable. It is a blight on the human conscience, on all of humanity. Like, we are now saying that these people are terrorists. Insane. I guess not we, but like in the UK, saying that these people are terrorists.
Aubri told Novara Media in response, quote, "This is the first case, and therefore the test case, for trying to convict activists as terrorists using a manipulated court process," unquote. In Ukraine, 5 people were killed in the city.
I recently saw this interview or like this discussion that Hassan had with Yanis Varoufakis, and how Yanis was saying essentially that what's happening, the Israeli state, and like they aren't exactly like Nazis. Like, he wouldn't make that comparison because Nazis would say that like every single Jewish person needed to be eradicated, and they'd track people down, chase them down like to the ends of the earth. And it's like, what's happening there, like with Palestine Action, those activists, people engaging in direct action, how anyone speaking up for Palestinian liberation, like how Palestinians across the globe are targeted by their own governments who are complicit in this genocide, I think is a hallmark of that. So I agree. I think like it is accurate to say these are Nazi tactics. Like, they are acting in that manner and have been. Just now, it seems like people are noticing a little bit more as the tide is turning for Palestinian liberation and not just endless support for the Israeli genocidal colonial settler project, that it's like, this must be talked about. So I think like Giannis's his comparison there, like I can see like where he was coming from, but I don't think it's accurate.
Kharkiv, after Russia launched an apparent double tap strike
It's
on
the
medical
same thing.
workers who
It
rushed
just
to put
looks
out the
slightly
flames
different.
from an earlier attack. Separate Russian strikes in Zaporizhia and Sumy left 2 dead and several others wounded. Among those killed was a 73-year-old woman whose car was struck by a Russian drone. Russia also launched its largest strikes on Kiev in weeks, killing 4 people, wounding more than 20 others. The attack seriously damaged the historic Kiev-Pecharsk-Lavra Monastery, a nearly 1,000-year-old symbol of Ukrainian cultural identity and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Meanwhile, Ukraine launched large-scale drone attacks targeting Russian industrial sites. The governor of Russia's Tula region says a Ukrainian drone attack killed 3 civilians while leaving 3 others injured, including a 1-year-old child. On Sunday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said he'd spoken to President Trump about efforts to end the conflict ahead of this week's G7 summit. In Afghanistan, at least 2 people were reported killed after Taliban police officers opened fire on crowds that had gathered to protest the detention of over 24 women accused of violating a strict dress code in the western city of Herat, according to the UN. Protests are extremely rare in Afghanistan since the Taliban took back control in 2021 following the U.S. and NATO occupation, imposing draconian measures, including a ban on women and girls accessing education and employment. In related news, dozens of U.S. Congress members, including at least 3 Republicans, are urging the Trump administration to halt its plan to deport hundreds of Afghan refugees who assisted U.S. forces during the invasion of Afghanistan to the Democratic Republic of Congo, or a third country they have no ties to. More than 1,000 Afghan refugees, many of whom served as U.S. interpreters, have been stranded in Qatar for over a year, since Trump officials halted their resettlement to the U.S. after they were evacuated from Afghanistan. The group includes over 400 children and family of U.S. service members. The Trump administration announced Friday a U.S. strike inside Venezuela had killed the alleged leader of the Tren de Aragua gang. The attack was done in coordination with Venezuela's interim government, which came to power after the U.S. abduction of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife. President Trump said on social media, U.S. forces, quote, delivered a swift and lethal kinetic strike to successfully execute, unquote, the accused leader, known as Nino Guerrero. Trump's Justice Department last year charged Guerrero with multiple federal crimes, including facilitating acts of terrorism. This comes as the Trump administration continues to attack boats off the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific, claiming without evidence the vessels are linked to drug trafficking. Over 200 people have been killed as the strikes are widely condemned as illegal. Brian Finnecane of the International Crisis Group said Guerrero's reported execution came as part of, quote, more lawless, performative killing by the Trump administration. Finnecane added, quote, outside of armed conflict, premeditated killing is referred to as murder, he said. The Trump administration's blocked the delivery of about 250,000 barrels of gasoline and diesel to Cuba. This follows an agreement between Cuban officials and a Florida-based company to supply the fuel to Cuba's private sector and humanitarian and religious organizations. Vanguard Energy had signed a contract to lease facilities owned by the Cuban government to store the fuel. But the Trump administration intervened, saying the company had not received proper approval. The shipment was seen as a temporary lifeline for Cuba as the U.S. enforces a near-total blockade on fuel that's compounded to already catastrophic humanitarian and energy crises after decades of U.S. sanctions on Cuba. In Albania, thousands of people took to the streets of the capital, Tirana, over the weekend as anti-government protests opposing the development of a massive resort linked to President Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, entered a third week. The multi-billion-dollar project would turn an abandoned Soviet weapons base known as Sazan into a luxury island resort. Protesters Sunday chanted, revolution.
We're talking about the corruption, and of course, this is just the first moment. The youth in here is just racing against this politics. It's not just the current government in general. So Albania never left communism. Now, this is a chance, and that's why we're here.
On Saturday, about 200 protesters tore down metal and razor wire fences surrounding the luxury development site on the Adriatic coast. Meanwhile, calls are growing for the resignation of the Albanian Prime Minister, Edi Rama. President Trump celebrated his 80th birthday Sunday by hosting an Ultimate Fighting Championship event on the White House lawn. Thousands of fans gathered around a massive 600-ton metal structure known as the Claw to watch a series of 7 mixed martial arts fights, all of which ended in a knockout while Trump and his family looked on.
This looks like
also
something...
attending were Trump's secretaries of...
The Claw, it looks like something that is in Utah. Like, apparently, like, U2 had this type of thing above one of their performances that they did, and then they gave it to, like, the American Fork Aquarium. American Fork, where all of the Lego stuff has been taking place. I used to live in American Fork. In my mind, I refer to it as American Fork in Electrical Socket because it is very bleak living there. Especially as a queer, multiracial person, it is very scary in many ways for many people. I wonder if they actually got that, or if this is something new. This is all just so fucking embarrassing. Collapse of empire shit with these Roman emperors trying to distract from their rampant corruption and the fall of their own empires by having gladiator fights. It's tasteless. It's just a complete waste of money. It also is just offensive to people who can't afford things right now with all of these endless wars, that he would rather do this than do anything meaningful to help improve the lives of the people that he supposedly is representing. But, you know, we know that's not how, like, representative politics work most of the time.
State, Commerce, Defense, Treasury, and Homeland Security. Along with FBI Director Kash Patel and other top officials, UFC champion Sean Strickland was removed from the event by the Secret Service. The 26-year-old fighter said on social media he was not invited to fight or even to attend because he, quote, made fun of Israel and Epstein, unquote. President Trump is a close friend of UFC Chief Executive Dana White, and Trump owns stock in the UFC's parent company. The UFC said some of the fighters at the event would be paid in cryptocurrency stablecoins issued by the Trump family business World Liberty Financial. Sunday's event was screened exclusively on Paramount Plus, which is run by Trump ally David Ellison. Meanwhile, the Trump administration's approved Paramount's $111 billion bid to acquire Warner Brothers. On Friday, the Justice Department's antitrust division said it had seen no evidence that the media mega merger would harm consumers, writing instead that the deal would, quote, increase competition across the media and entertainment ecosystem, unquote. If completed,
saying it would increase competition is such bullshit gaslighting. It is absolutely insane.
Major movie studios two top
while
streaming
they're
services
creating
and news
larger
outlets,
monopolies.
CNN and NBC News, as well as HBO, all under the control of billionaire David Ellison, a vocal supporter of President Trump. And in Washington, D.C.,
And the Israeli
wall of
state.
the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts remains covered by tarps after
And
a federal
genocide.
judge ordered Donald Trump's name be removed from the building. The judge had given work crews until Saturday at noon to remove metal letters marking Trump's name from the facade of the towering marble building after ruling that the president's rebranding of the center to include his own name constituted an illegal act. And a correction, Paramount owns CBS, not NBC. We'll talk more about the merger later in the broadcast with Free Press's Craig Aaron. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman, today reporting from Belfast, Northern Ireland. Thanks for watching Democracy Now!
Okay. I am interested in seeing her coverage in Belfast. This world really sucks. It's hard trying to maintain revolutionary optimism when we have such huge power imbalances, but also we have numbers in our favor. And actually human empathy, caring about other people, actually having a cause to be fighting for. These are the things that we must hold to, at least that I try to hold to, in order to be like, what's the point? What's the point in doing anything? But this is why we also need to temper what's happening with current events with more optimistic things of action and resistance and learning about theory, just reading, trying to make it so that we are learning from historical events and we are living in the present in analyzing what can be done now, because we need to be engaging. If you are not involved in any sort of like organizing work, like beyond just being on social media for things, that is needing to be done. We need to engage. We need to take on a modicum of risk if we are actually wanting to move the needle, because we must be speaking out against these things, and not only speaking out, we must be doing things. So please get involved with local mutual aid if there is not, like starting up your own mutual aid, especially as all of this bullshit is happening. I guess like over the weekend, Elon Musk became the first trillionaire, or is like on track to be. Like, who the fuck cares? Like, I intentionally did not talk about it because I didn't want to like be giving it the clicks and views that like that idiotic fascist still wants. Like, that's clearly what he is wanting. But we also need to be talking about, like, with the Ellisons, with Musk, that this accumulation of wealth that they are holding, that they cannot possibly be spending it in generations to come because of how much money they have. And they're such fucking losers that they have to buy people in to have, like, buy all of these different media outlets. They have to buy favor in order to feel like they have any sort of human beings that are liking them, but then they also are anti-human in so many ways, and they don't care about us, that it's like, if you actually like were a decent human being, you wouldn't feel the need to be buying up all of this shit. But again, it's like, this is where we have to say, like, these power structures are inherently unethical. These vehicles for achieving this kind of wealth is anti-human. It is not based in any sort of human empathy, which is why Elon Musk famously said that, like, one of the greatest weaknesses of the West is human empathy, which also is, like, deeply colonizing and not only problematic, but demonizing the East, whatever in his mind that is, or the global South, because he is an ethnic cleansing eugenicist, where he is just bent on wanting to have all of these, like, accolades, like, oh, this is a win. Okay, like, to whom? Because, like, money doesn't make you cool. Money doesn't make you interesting. Money doesn't make you into, like, your own human being that has, like, profound thoughts and feelings and hopes and desires. It doesn't make you an artist. Money doesn't make you liked. It's like, it just gets it so you can buy your way into rooms that you view as, like, holding some sort of status that you are desiring. That doesn't mean that it comes from like human beings supporting you and liking you. He has to buy this shit for a reason, because all of these billionaires, these capitalists, these white supremacists, eugenicists, colonizing, patriarchal cishet bullshit, bullshit, they're just bullshit, that they cannot rely on their own merits. They can't, because otherwise they wouldn't feel the need to be like buying up all of these things. They wouldn't be reliant on other human beings for them to then take credit for all of their work. It's like, it's so fucking uncool, and they're desperate to be cool. And it's like, you can't be when you are inherently in this power imbalance that you're like, oh, people need to respect me. No, we don't. In fact, it's a good thing to be disrespecting you. That like you will never know what it means to actually engage with another human being and actually see eye to eye and like stand on your own 2 feet and be proud of the work that you've done, because these people don't work, because they have to siphon our wages for a reason, and then to justify the positions that they're in instead of recognizing that all of what they have gotten has been stolen, it's not earned, that they have to indulge their fragile fucking egos and being like, no, I'm inherently better, that's why I'm doing this. Like, okay, fuck you. How about fuck you? Because you're not cool, and you're desperately trying to be cool and have been trying to be cool. You want to have a million kids that are going to be just as weird as you. I mean, not necessarily. There are some that are fine. Looking at you, Vivian. But like, it's not their fault. Their parents, or like one of their parents, is like such an egomaniacal narcissist. That's like, what is going on here? They will never know what it is like to actually like feel the warmth of human connection, because they aren't capable of that. Anyway, that's my diatribe. Let's listen to Amy about this anti-racist rally, because we are needing to talk about this. But that leads me into, you know, Elon Musk saying like, oh, it's like white people that are being attacked in Belfast. JD Vance saying the exact same thing, despite him having a wife and children who are Indian, who are Southeast Asian. He is demonizing Southeast Asian communities, especially like Indian people, but Sikh people who are being targeted by all of this racialized violence, including people who are Sudanese and Somali. And how, like, I keep reiterating to people, I will say this over and over again, that, like, just because someone has a family member, a supposed partner or lover, or they have some sort of relationship with someone who is a person of color, who is marginalized in any sort of way, it doesn't mean that they actually care about this person, that they, like, let alone love them. I can speak from personal experience. Sometimes this means that, like, the people who claim to be closest to you often hate you the most because of you not being exactly like them in particular ways. That's like, just because he has a wife and children that may look like some of the people that are being attacked, that doesn't mean he even likes the people there. Like, clearly not. It doesn't mean he even likes his own wife and children. He probably doesn't, because he doesn't stand up for them regularly. This is not a weird thing. I mean, it is a weird thing. You should be wanting to do this for people, like standing up for the people you supposedly care about. But like, this phenomenon is not new. So like, stop trying to say like, why would he, like, he actually cares about people. No, he doesn't. Or like being surprised that he wouldn't. Because like, this is par for the course for many of these people who hold deeply like white supremacist colonizing beliefs. And like, this is not to let Usha Vance and their kids, or I mean, their kids aren't involved, but like Usha Vance and like other people who are tokenized, like Kash Patel, off the hook, like because they are on the receiving end of racist remarks. Like, this is caste. We are looking at caste. So like, they don't care that this is happening to other people. They are viewing these people as being like so-called like untouchables. So there we go.
Democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We're broadcasting from Northern Visions TV, community television here in Belfast. We're here in Belfast for the Docs Ireland Film Festival. The film about democracy now, Steal the Story Please, will be premiering first at the film festival on Tuesday night at Queen's Cinema. We look forward to seeing folks there. I'll be there with the director, Tia Lesson. Here in Belfast, Northern Ireland, tens of thousands of people gathered Saturday outside Belfast City Hall for a rally organized by United Against Racism. The solidarity protest, which was supported by local trade unions, followed several days of violence in Northern Ireland in which masked rioters set fire to houses and cars, targeting immigrants and ethnic minorities. In one incident, 4 masked men reportedly chased a nurse into the Ulster Hospital. In another, 2 Ugandan health workers were barricaded in their home for 4 hours as neighboring properties burned and rioters threw stones at their windows. Emergency services told them it was too dangerous to try and leave. Their pastor eventually managed to negotiate their exit. This is
Black
Belfast
bloc
resident
tactics
Constantino,
being
who
used
attended
by
the Together Against Hate
fascists, white
demonstration.
nationalists, shitheads, and
And
cops.
it's not what this city is. So everybody here today is united in support of our migrant and new arrivals. We're here showing solidarity. This is what this city is about. And I say to those racists, you're not welcome. This isn't your city. This belongs to everybody.
The disorder began a week ago after an asylum seeker from Sudan was charged with attempted murder and a stabbing attack. As video of the attack circulated online, calls for protests against immigration followed. The family of the victim, Stephen Ogilvie, who lost his eye in the attack, urged against violence. They wrote in a statement, quote, "We are aware of the tensions and talk of the protests following this incident. We want to make it absolutely clear that overnight unrest is not welcome. We do not want this terrible tragedy to be used to divide people or fuel hostility," they wrote. Less than 24 hours after the attack, hundreds of people joined protests, some becoming violent. Police in Belfast deployed water cannons to quell the anti-immigrant rioters. At least 23 people were arrested, 12 police officers injured. Hilary Benn, the UK Northern Ireland secretary, condemned the violence as racist.
Why is it that there seems to be a lot of people who are on the right who claim to love cops? They are some of the most eager to be brutalizing cops because they realize, as they're trying to claim there's this 2-tiered police system against white people, that like they aren't going to be experiencing the same kind of severity or like nearly the amount of brutalization that happens to people of color or marginalized people, like other kinds of marginalized people when it comes to police brutality. That like they're able to get away with that because of their whiteness. It's just like so absurd.
Well, if you are targeting people on the basis of their colour of their skin, how else can you describe them? That is racist thuggery. There's no question about it at all. Because we are a society where, as Martin Luther King famously said, we should judge people by the content of their character and not by the colour of their skin. And these are people who have come to Northern Ireland, settled. Someone was forced out of their home. They've been living here for 20 years. And they're working in the health service. They're working in industry. They are colleagues and friends of people who were born and brought up in Northern Ireland. And there is no place for this whatsoever.
Hilary Benn is Northern Ireland's Secretary of State. He's an MP, a member of the British Parliament. He's also the son of the late MP for over 50 years, Tony Benn, the famous anti-war Labour MP. When the anti-immigrant violence broke out, Belfast resident Ruchira Rangaprasad put out a call on social media offering to provide food to people too scared to leave their homes and also requested volunteers help make the deliveries.
I think I'm personally scared to step out of my house. I don't want to be out. I don't want to, because especially like there was like a hit list being passed around with like addresses and all of that. So, and a lot of those hit list roads are very close to me. And there are so many, like literally basically every single area in Belfast is somehow on that hit list. So like people are scared to step out of their home, and food is like a basic need. And especially like nutritious home cooked food is so important, especially during this time. So that's why I thought, okay, let me like cook and help people. I've been in Northern Ireland about 3 years now. Actually, if anything, I feel like from this experience from yesterday and today, I have a lot more respect for Northern Ireland, and I love Northern Ireland and Belfast a lot more, because one day 30 plus people showed up, all strangers, just being like, I will help. And there's literally war out there. There's petrol bombs being thrown out there, and they don't care, and they're like, we will help and we will give this food, and you know, we got you. And that spirit I have never seen in any other city. So I actually love Belfast.
For more, I'm joined in studio here in Belfast, Northern Ireland, by two guests. Sinead
Being
Martin
able
is
to
an
see
immigration lawyer
like some
based
of the
in
worst
Belfast.
and best of
He's the Northern
humanity.
Ireland director of Amnesty International UK. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! It's
She's
great
a
to be with
hero.
you in studio here at Northern
That's
Vision.
heroic
Patrick,
work.
let's begin with you. You both were at the mass protest this weekend. That protest for immigration and against what Hilary Benn called the racist thuggery. You were speaking, Patrick, to a lot of the community activists on the ground right here in front of Belfast City Hall. It was really interesting because I flew in from Sheffield, the film festival there. As we left, there was an anti-immigrant protest of 60 or 70 people, but a lot of people responding. And as I flew in, tens of thousands of people saying, no, this is a different Belfast.
That's right. It was such an important ray of light after a very grim week for Belfast, and be able to stand with my neighbours, fellow citizens of Belfast, in their thousands, to send a message to those racist thugs that they do not represent the true spirit of Belfast. And the vast majority of people in Belfast, as across Northern Ireland, are anti-racist and very welcoming to the people who've come here to make their lives from around the world, who work in our health and care sectors and many other walks of life. And we wanted to send, most importantly, I think, a message to them, say, you are welcome. This is your city, this is your home, just as much as it is ours. But also to call out the politicians and the state authorities who had left people vulnerable and under attack during the days before.
Talk about who were the people, masked young men particularly, who were burning houses houses and cars. Talk about how this started.
You know, this is the third consecutive summer of racist organised mob violence we have seen in Belfast and beyond in Northern Ireland. So it didn't happen in a vacuum, and increasingly it is coordinated both online and offline.
This hasn't happened just out of nowhere.
Paramilitary circles. A lot of the violence happened in areas in Belfast that they effectively control, and that nobody would be able to take over the streets and commit that sort of level of violence without their say so. The people, some of the people who are out on the streets masked and mobbed up were teenagers, and I think they've been exploited, manipulated. Others were grown men, some of whom have a long history of violence in this city. And I think on top of that, then we have a wider ecosystem of online anti-immigration and pro-racism being promoted and being used. Those online spaces being used to organise people as well as actively promote misinformation. And I think that terrible incident that happened at the start of the week was immediately seized on and exploited by people in order to engender hate and ultimately to result in violence, which we had sadly been predicting was coming. We had been warning the authorities, and sadly when it happened, they were found wanting. And too often it was left to community activists, many of them I was speaking to on Saturday at the anti-racism rally, who had gone in to people's homes who were under attack, people's homes who were being firebombed, and rescuing them out the back door, putting them into their own cars, bringing them to emergency accommodation, which had been organised on positive community WhatsApp groups overnight. And it's those people who think are the real heroes of the moment of these last few days, as well as the tens of thousands who took to the streets of Belfast to say this is the real Belfast.
Can you talk about Elon Musk? What does he have to do with these protests?
Well, it was he, alongside some of these other online space, these social media owners, have been allowing their platforms to be used not only to promote misinformation, disinformation, but also to be used as an organising space for the racists. The call went out on social media for people to come out ready to fight, ready to get arrested, to wear all in black, to put on masks, to turn off their mobile phone cameras, warnings for people to turn off their doorbell cams so that the police wouldn't be able to identify people through video afterwards. So not only did Elon Musk, however, allow his social media platform to be used in that way, he joined in and he was resharing far-right content as well. We have our own fair share of homegrown racists in this place. The last thing that we needed was people like Elon Musk and others.
Descendant of Nazis, literal Nazi doing Nazi shit. Surprise, surprise. Is it any wonder that these people are trying to control the means of communication? Something that Marx and Engels have been talking about, and I mean, people even before them, like in various circles, and saying that, like, yeah, these people who are capitalists, who are part of this ruling class, are able to tamp down and end these or stifle. What is it? Which word am I looking for? Anyway, they are able to stifle. I don't know what other word I was mixing that with, but they're able to stifle revolutionary movements because they buy up the means of communication. And like, this is just par for the course when it comes to fascists doing fascist shit. But especially now that we are in this techno-feudalism, that the ruling class, like the aristocrats that Marx and Engels viewed as being separate from the bourgeois, that they are the same thing.
Joining the pro-protest parties.
Sinead Marmion, you certainly saw this happening. You're an immigration lawyer. You're dealing with a lot of immigrants right now who are terrified. Many are recruited to come here to Belfast by, for example, Unison, the massive union. 50,000 union members are here to be healthcare workers, to work in hospitals, home care. And yet you have Elon Musk amplifying. Talk about whose voices he was amplifying.
Absolutely. You're right to say that our health service relies on foreign labour that is actively sought. And Elon Musk has been portraying that, he's targeted our Lord Mayor, for example, who's just been in office a week, and saying that she's a betrayer of our people.
30 years old.
She is, yeah. And
what did he say?
He said she was a betrayer of our people, of her people. So an extremely evocative statement and provocative, and it has undoubtedly led to the mobilisation, as Patrick has said, of those racist thugs, of the community groups that have been historically existent here, ready to attack people in their homes. And I've heard from clients who were put out of their houses, were burnt out of their houses, clients with young kids who are terrified. And as Patrick says, it's the community that has picked up the pieces. It's women in the community, it's migrant women in the community that have organised and mobilised the response, and our authorities have been left wanting, as Patrick has said as well. So it is an extremely volatile situation, but it's not the Belfast that we know and love, having worked with communities and worked with lots of people who call Belfast their home.
Can you talk about some calls that you have gotten?
Yes, I received a call over the weekend from a client of mine from Syria who has a young daughter, and her daughter was sending me messages saying that her mum was too sad to come to the phone. She and her mum had slept in the kitchen of the house at the back of the property because they were too afraid to be seen. They have been left again without any help from the authorities, and we're looking to try and assist somehow with her and her child. I have another client who was burned out of her house, and she's a young child as well, and she's now staying in emergency accommodation. So it has been affecting people that have called Belfast their home for numbers of years, who are legally and lawfully here, and have now been targeted in essentially what is racial profiling.
And that shouldn't be a qualifier. That shouldn't fucking be a qualifier of if people are legally and lawfully here. Who the fuck cares? Because who was making these laws? These fascists and racists and colonizers who didn't care about law or sovereignty when they were stealing fucking land. So, like, what does that even mean? Oh, my God.
Center halted evening prayers last week due to the racist violence. This is Kashif Alram, who's a member of the center's executive committee.
It's heartbreaking. It really is. At the same time, Belfast is full of a lot of decent people. We've had a lot of support from the local community, and the people who are spreading the hate at the moment, they're a minority. They're very few, but definitely it's sent shocks throughout the whole community. A lot of ethnic minority people at the moment are living in fear. We're getting a lot of calls at the moment. The levels of distress are very, very high. I've lived in Northern Ireland, born and bred here, 44 years. This is the worst I've seen it. Does it change my kind of perception, or does it make me fearful of living here? Definitely not. I see hope. And hope is not something we just sit and kind of pray or think about. It's created by action, and we're seeing that. We're seeing a lot of local support. We're seeing people come together. Communities are sick and tired of this sort of intimidation, which has been happening in Belfast over the years.
That's Kashif Akram of the Belfast Islamic Centre. Patrick, you know him well.
Yes, and unfortunately the Islamic Centre has been the target of repeated attacks over recent years, including last year, an attempted firebomb attack into the building itself. The Muslim community in Belfast and across Northern Ireland has been under very serious threat. There has been a particular anti-Muslim, anti-Islam dimension to these racist attacks. We have seen murals and banners and placards going up across Belfast and elsewhere, not just in the last week, but over the last several years, that are specifically targeting Muslims for this sort of race hate. So they are particularly vulnerable at the moment, and as our heart goes out to them, but they have also been on the receiving end of huge public community support. And again, to reiterate the message of the anti-racism protest, that's the real spirit of Belfast, and that's the views of most people who live here, not the vociferous and sometimes violent minority that we saw on our streets last week as well.
And Sinead Marmion, if you could talk about the Sudanese women who are gathering to do mutual aid.
Yes, it's been fantastic. There's an organisation called the Anaka Collective in Belfast. Yes, and it's run by women. It's a women's collective, and indeed 2 Sudanese women as well. So they have organised pretty much immediate support across other community organisations, across certain political parties as well have assisted. I say certain, not all. And we've seen a complete rehoming, I think, of 200 people in the past week, food deliveries, people getting lifts to appointments, and it's an unbelievable community effort, which is the real spirit of Belfast. But it does come against the backdrop from our government of hostile environment policies that have been created over the past number of years, that demonises immigration. It focuses on negative immigration. It hasn't put any positive policies in place for integration. We have no racial equality strategy here in Northern Ireland. We have no anti-poverty strategy. None of that has been moved to assist people who are coming to Belfast to call it their home. And it's against the backdrop of where we have political parties that are stoking the flames and encouraging what they call a legitimate concern on immigration in circumstances where that is not well-founded, and the conversation resultingly is always toxic.
Patrick, as we begin to wrap up, can you put this in a global context, what we're seeing here in Belfast, which is not, of course, isolated? And by the way, the pro-immigration protests that took place here this weekend took place in Derry, took place really in so many places in solidarity with immigrants. But what about this right-wing push that really features anti-immigrant racism?
So we know we're not alone in Northern Ireland facing these problems of racist and sometimes violent racists, with a backdrop of anti-immigration, anti-migrant political rhetoric, sometimes coming from leaders of countries. We've seen that across Europe. We've seen it obviously in the US. Sometimes people are coming to build their lives here because they're fleeing some of the wars that you talked about at the top of the programme. Otherwise, they're coming for economic reasons to build new lives, just as Irish people have done to the US and elsewhere for many, many generations. But I think what we have seen globally is sort of a far-right stoking of people's fears, exploiting people's fears around societies that are changing, shifting a little bit. And I think what we need is real political leadership. The words of condemnation we got from Hilary Benn, from Keir Starmer this week, they're welcome, but they're not really very useful to people who are being burned out of their homes.
Changing.
And are worried about what the rest of this summer holds.
Whatever that means.
Which step up to the mark rather than joining in the inflammatory rhetoric.
Yeah, what that means, like these places changing, just white people hand-wringing over this idiotic concept of declining white birth rates. Here, I have something for you. What if you white prudes get these sticks out of your asses and actually fucked more instead of being so fucking puritanical about it all and saying like, oh, you like trying to dictate who can have sex and why and when, and like maybe if you weren't doing that, you would have more reproducing that happened with white people. But that's also not the issue. It's always just this concept of fear-mongering to demonize people of color that is this larger aspect of continuing colonizing that is based off of colorism and xenophobia and anti-blackness, that like this has to end. And like I have been saying this, but like I'll insert this once again. People who are considering themselves leftists, like you have to place the bar of anti-leftism at not only being anti-capitalist, which many of these people are, people need to do some serious fucking decolonization of their minds. You also need to have a hallmark of leftism be anti-capitalism, anti-colonialism, anti-racism, anti-queerphobia, anti-sexism, anti-ableism, anti-xenophobia, anti-Islamophobia, anti-any sort of bigotry that makes it so that people are dehumanized. That has to be a defining characteristic of leftism. We must be redefining what leftism means, because otherwise there isn't any room for building out these movements. And there are many people, especially, I'm calling out some of these shitheads on this platform that we're on right now, Twitch, that there are many white dudes who claim to be leftists who are not only like going after FD Signifier, like another Twitch streamer and YouTuber who is a leftist who does some really incredible education, but also to other people for criticizing anyone who is claiming to be a leftist but like is not actually engaging in more of a decolonizing perspective of like just prioritizing their own feelings and electoralism and having these white savior complexes and putting up white saviors rather than viewing the collective aspect of liberation that is necessary. So like, how about you all get your heads out of your asses and actually come around to understanding that we need solidarity, and that if you aren't willing to give up your racism, give up your colonizer fucking attitudes, you need to get out of the way and shut the fuck up. Because I'm so tired of this bullshit. Oh my god. I need
flammable materials been put into people's homes. And I think that the Keir Starmers, the Hillary Benns, and our own political leaders have a lot to answer for in terms of the lack of leadership they have given. Condemnation statements are easy after the event. A bit of sympathy for people, easy after the event. What did you do before? How did you heed the warnings from the summer violence we had last year, the summer violence we had the year before? I'm afraid the answer is nothing. And into that vacuum have stepped community activists trying to do the right thing to rescue their neighbours. But we need political leadership now. We need it in this country, but we need it globally.
Patrick Corrigan, Northern Ireland Director of Amnesty International UK, and Sinead Marmion, immigration lawyer based here in Belfast. Thanks for watching Democracy Now! On YouTube. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to make sure you never miss a video. And for more of our audience-supported journalism, go to democracynow.org, where you can download our news app.
Okay,
sign up for our newsletter.
now that we've talked about that, I did want to show this that was happening in Albania as people are protesting. Kushner, Tom Riddle is what I call him, how I refer to him as, and Ivanka Trump, just colonizers and fascists doing fascist bullshit once again. So this is what resistance looks like. Surprised the police are even standing by that side at that moment. That shows when they're afraid of people. Oh wait, I'll go back so I can read that.
Edhe kam thënë fillim që nuk e keni tetë me marrë me gjuha vjesën e tjetër kujt e pronën e tjetër kujt nëse jashtëmendori siç ato ndodhin. Na kena këndo që vinë ata sa të nit, marrë ashtu më konsultua me popin, nuk ligojnë, kujton se marrin tonë pasoni ata pa gjake pa në gjatë. Që do bëhet.
Yeah, now cops are getting more involved. All right. So, speaking of decolonizing, it was interesting. Before I went live today, I happened to see a comment on YouTube of someone on a day that I had a mustache on because love, hot, cool. And this person was like, "You need to police your mustache," and they didn't even spell things right, which spelling, that's a colonial thing. But so anyway, thinking that they're coming at me without without even having like any sort of semblance really of understanding what they were trying to say, except for me being like, oh, this is targeted to queerness. One of my activities that I like to do, and perhaps this is toxic and I should stop this, but when this happens, I will often look at like people's accounts and like who they follow, the playlists that they make, or if they create their own content just out of curiosity, because I'm like, where are these people coming from? And this person in particular had like a playlist of like revolutionary movements and like being like for like solidarity and stuff, and like, do you not understand that like collective liberation means including queer people? That like when you're talking about revolution, when you're talking about like wanting to free these lands that have been colonized, hello? I'm part of this. Queer people are part of this, especially queer people of color. Hello? Do you realize that many queer identities, gender expansiveness is a colonial, that has been attempted to be erased by colonial settler projects or just ethnic cleansing in general? If you claim to be for revolution, if you claim to be for liberation, you have to mean it for everyone. Okay. Continuing our conversation about decolonizing, I saw this video that I thought was very excellent. That is John R. Silly Boy and Bryson Silly Boy talking about decolonizing queerness to two-spirit people who are going to be talking about their own perspective in decolonizing pride. Because as we are continuing to talk about liberation, queer liberation, like on the flip side, queer people also need to do their own fucking decolonization as well, because it has largely been co-opted by these white capitalist powers, people who are wanting to claim that they are for queer liberation when they just want to capitalize off of our existence. And also the fact that like queer spaces can be incredibly racist. Queer spaces can be transphobic. Queer spaces can be discriminatory towards non-binary people as well. Like, and that's included in transphobia, although not everyone who is non-binary thinks of themselves as trans, so there is that. But many people who are non-binary are received as and perceived as being trans in this system. So just clarifying that. That like we must be breaking down all of this bullshit if we are truly wanting to engage in collective liberation, because that's what that fucking means. Okay, let's watch this. Oh, whoops.
And I identify as gay and queer as well.
I'm John R.
I'm Mi'kmaq. I'm from Secwepemc First Nations in Nova Scotia. I'm two-spirit, and I identify as gay and queer as well.
I'm John R. Silly Boy, and I'm from Eskasoni and Millbrook both. I'm the executive director of the Wabanaki Two-Spirit Alliance and also the co-founder with Duma Young. Well, that's an evolving term, even from my perspective, which bases it on a on-the-way worldview around what Two-Spirit is. I did my master's conceptualizing what Two-Spirit is and published a couple of papers related to it. There's various degrees of how Two-Spirit is explained. In my master's, I had explained that it was an umbrella term that's being used to identify Indigenous people who do not fit that binary of identity based on gender, and sexuality encompasses anything that has to do with 2S LGBTQIA+ terms. And it's been used.
That's also a form of decolonization, of saying 2S LGBTQIA, of saying two-spirit first. That's what the 2S means.
Turtle Island, but it's also expanded outside of Turtle Island into other areas internationally.
Somebody who is, closely tied to their Indigenous culture. Like for us Mi'kmaq, we're still in the process of reclaiming it. Our traditional two-spirit like customs and practices were wiped out through colonization. So we're in the midst of revitalization and resurgence in practices being two-spirit. So we don't really know what our specific practices were. So we kind of are consulting with other nations throughout North America, and kind of trying to find our foot.
So to be two-spirited, it identifies our connection to our historical, cultural aspects of who we are. That queer people and gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans, and the other, acronym terms don't have that specific understanding of their identity. We do as Two-Spirit people, because it's very important that we understand that our historical, our ancestral, and our spiritual connections toward our identity as Two-Spirit people is important.
Because it shows your connection to your culture and your connection to the land, to your heritage, and like it just gives you a sense of community, like within an indigenous space, and something that's meant for us and us alone.
Well, it's very important because that's the term that we as Ulnub have adopted as an indigenous term to, instead of using any of the English terms, we can use Two-Spirit is still an English term, but at least it's in reference to indigenous people specifically. So that's important for one. The reason why that's important is that when we do seek services, for example, gender affirming care for people who are Two-Spirit specific, then we would know better numbers and how to advocate for those better numbers so that those resources can be aligned and assigned to our communities and to our organizations that advocate for this. That's why it's very important that we have Two-Spirit there.
Like decolonization is different for everybody. What works for me doesn't necessarily work for somebody else, but I know like it has to involve Two-Spirit people because our cultures have been decimated by colonization, and the church and residential schools, Indian day schools, every aspect of that. Queer people have existed, for time immemorial, and since colonization happened, we kind of got sidelined and thrown to the goals. I think decolonization really does have to like center Two-Spirit people in it because we were vital to a lot of tribes, a lot of nations.
You have to remember that a lot of these narratives and historical documents, and even documents that were taken by historians or people that were doing, census on indigenous people, it was their perspectives, it was their narratives and their interpretations of who we were, not necessarily capturing the true essence of who we are or who we were and who we are today. So we have to decolonize and separate what the narratives are from the colonists, the colonizers, and the people that had narrated all these Jesuit relations, our policies, and their observations. And we have to stick true to how we are as Ulnu and go back to the source of who we are based on our principles and values. And I sincerely think that that is a way that I'm decolonizing and indigenizing and Ulnuadu how we're thinking based on that Two-Spirit concept. We know that gender identity right now is a complex issue with the 713 policy, for example, in New Brunswick. That includes Two-Spirit people, but we're saying you have no right to tell us how we can self-identify as Ulnu. That's our inherent and Aboriginal and Indigenous and Ulnu right. So I argue that that's how we have to stick true to who we are. At the same time, on the other side, we know that's a stance of self-determination. That's a stance of recognizing our identity as who we are. That's a, like a human rights stance as well. What really is about identifying Two-Spirit as well is understanding that we need to bring our ceremonies back into practice for Two-Spirit people who have been pushed aside and pushed outside of the circles because, traditionalists say, that's a European concept. That's not our traditional way. When in fact, traditionalists centuries back had also been impacted by colonial rules and Christian rules who said, you have to wear, this, you have to act this way because you're a boy, you got to act this way because you're a girl. Those were colonial constructs impacting our, previous cultural beliefs. And then they were readopted by our own communities and then retaught back to the new generations as traditions. I think people were just allowed to do and be and celebrate your identity and how you are. I really believe that. I think the influence of colonial heteronormative practices came into law. And people who were revered as Two-Spirited and because they were healers and shamans and medicine people, they were the first ones attacked because they were spiritual guides. And so the religious movements across Canada during those colonial periods would have went after those religious people first, those spiritual people first. And if they were Two-Spirited, with all the more reason because they didn't also represent the gender or the sexuality, not only the spirituality components.
I think in order for us to decolonize queer spaces, we have to look at queer spaces themselves and the bigotry that's accepted in queer spaces. Queer people, they're marginalized, but that doesn't absolve them from racism, transphobia, sexism, any kind of bigotry. And that is often overlooked in queer spaces because, we kind of use our queerness as a shield, that automatically absolves us from our bigotry or protects us. It all always comes down to centering BIPOC voices in queer spaces and making sure that it is known that, this space is truly for everybody. Have a place to be able to smudge, have a place where you can pray, have a place that's accessible as well, because I find a lot of queer places aren't accessible. So we got to think about our community. We're not just able-bodied people.
Queer organizations that are outside of our Indigenous communities, we went to them as well and said, listen, you really have to up your game when it comes to Two-Spirit content and Two-Spirit spaces. So we started advocating building spaces in Pride organizations. We started building spaces literally, let's say in Pride Halifax, we put up a TV right at the Garrison grounds so that Indigenous people would be identified there. they would see them there as Two-Spirit people. And that made a great impact, not only for the non-Indigenous people outside of our community, but they also said, we have to celebrate Two-Spirit people as well. They are part of our community, not just JSAs. We need policies. We need celebrate ceremonial aspects. We need powwows in communities. We need spaces in schools. We need people to be celebrated in their own identity wherever we can. And then we want policies to be inclusive of our people, right? Which means housing, education, health, gender-affirming care, for example. It's not a matter of GSA anymore. It's a matter of people's well-being, and to a certain degree, a matter of life and death for some people. Join us. We want Two-Spirit people to join us with the Wabanaki Two-Spirit Lines, for example. Join us in schools, join us in powwows, join us in pride activities, join us when we're advocating for all our rights, and to build curricula, let's say in MK schools. We want to build social services for Two-Spirit people in health centers. We want people to just be included everywhere, but we need them to feel that they can trust us. We'll protect you as much as we can. We'll advocate for you for sure, and we're doing that anyway. But we want to hear from people and celebrate their identity in the best way possible when we do have gatherings. Yeah, that's the message is we hear you, we're here for you, and we want you to be more involved with us if you can.
Just be yourself. You're who you're supposed to be. You know, like it took me a long time to figure out who I was. I grew up in the 80s and 90s where being queer was not acceptable. And I look at today's youth and like they have the whole world at their hands, and there's so much information out there and so much resources out there for them. And it's not gonna matter what your parents say. It's not gonna matter what your friends say. It's not gonna matter what anybody says. Like you're who you're meant to be, and you will find your community no matter where you're from. You will find a community where you belong, and you will be accepted.
Ugh, that makes me emotional. Yeah, it's not an accident that colonizers recognize these power structures throughout time and history in understanding that their power comes from these hierarchies of human dignity that are built off of patriarchy, cishet normativity, ableism, and, xenophobia, that, and embedded in all of this is deep racism, of course, that it is radical to be accepting of yourself. Like, one of the more radical things that I feel like I have done and do and engage in a revolutionary manner is humanizing myself when it comes to Hydra identity and engaging with the sacredness. I'm not even a religious person, or not anymore, but the sacred understanding of duality and the feminine and masculine and what those things even mean, and how sometimes they don't mean anything, and how this just goes to show that all of these constructs are very social and imposed rather than embracing the human aspects. So, continuing with decolonization, I did want to watch this video by Vijay Prashad, Decolonization via Marxist Lens. This is the video. I probably will have to refresh this once again. This, after listening to Zizek's psychobabble and instinctive adoration of the West, this is like a breath of fresh air. Yep. All right. Let's also speed this up just so we can get to more things.
Okay. I was just going to say, I don't know whether the World Cup match between Iran and England has been played yet. I don't want
This
to get
made
into
2
that
years
because I
ago.
want to watch it later. My timings are a little upset.
Right. The decolonization movement spanned the world from the mid-20th century to its conclusion. I mean, I don't agree. This also is saying, why we need to continue to talk about decolonizing within leftism. This is from the Marx Memorial Library, but they're viewing it in terms of political decolonization, not that resistance to colonization itself. That type of decolonizing existed since the beginning of colonizers coming and stealing land and killing people. That and in pursuing their ethnic genocidal cleansing projects, that it's like, that is decolonization, resistance in that manner. So just existing, but it was in more like scholarly speak, especially when it came to white spaces and white people, in terms of decolonization as like a theoretical framework in the mid 20th century. So like in the 1900s. So like that's also part of decolonizing, not just saying that like something is valid once white people have noticed it.
Down. But anyway, the Marx Memorial Library, by far my favorite institution in the what it was formerly known as the United Kingdom. Anyway, I hope you can hear me okay. I want to make a few comments about the question of decolonization, decolonial thought, anti-colonialism, anti-imperialism, and so on. If you're interested, I would like to recommend that you go to the website of the Tricontinental, which is thetricontinental.org, and download our dossier, which we did with the Casa de las Americas in Havana, Cuba. This is called 10 Theses on Marxism and Decolonization. Now, I'm not actually going to talk directly about this text or from this text, but I highly recommend the text at any rate. I think it might be useful for people to read and study. It's a very slim text, like all our monthly dossiers, but this one in particular, I highly recommend. So please go and have a look at it. Now, we are in a very tough place right now. Obviously, Europe is definitely convulsed by the conflict in Ukraine. That's what the focus is on. The knock-on effects of that conflict are going to impact people with the cost of living in places, that run from Germany, which is already experiencing quite high inflation, high energy prices as a consequence of the cutoff, largely the slowing down of Russian natural gas. Certainly the destruction of Nord Stream 2 is going to have long-term impact for cost of living in Germany, but also in the rest of the continent and in England and Scotland, Wales, and so on. Okay, so we know that that's where the focus is on largely, get rid of the war in Ukraine. It's interesting, of course, that so little focus is on other wars that are ongoing on the planet, including, I just reported the conflict from the Democratic Republic of Congo, where in the eastern flank of that country, once more, we are waiting for an invasion, in fact, an expeditionary type force.
Glad that he's talking about that. This is part of decolonizing.
The Democratic Republic of Congo over the last 30 years has seen.
This is something that I have to call out as well, of like in the West, especially when the Western world, whatever that means, which usually just is like Eurocentric, white supremacist countries that are largely prioritizing Christianity as part of their founding, not acknowledging indigenous practices that were taken over and erased because of these religious movements. But actually talking about how there are these ongoing struggles that have not been noticed as much, that a lot of this has to do with Islamophobia, a lot of this has to do with like colorism that's based in white supremacy, but also this colorism that is based in anti-blackness as well, and how we must be talking about these things if we want to have an honest assessment of the world that we are living in, how we have gotten to this place. Especially as I have seen more people come around to Palestinian liberation, like I myself have, like I will admit being largely ignorant over many aspects of this, having understood growing up, I think being more exposed to this concept in like my later 20s. I'm 31 now, but just having known that there were some writers that I admired that didn't want their books published in Israel because it was an apartheid state, and like admittedly not investigating it as much as I should have. And this is part of the process of like admitting this and focusing on what can be done to be better and do better. And also understanding how like people who are just focused on Palestinian liberation, not the liberation collectively of all people who are being genocided, like this is largely a form of anti-blackness, and also where people have like proximity to whiteness. And I know many people look at it as like, oh, well, it's like, who is like, our countries are doing more direct harm in this particular area. And it's like, you're only viewing it in that way because it is no longer convenient. Like enough information has come out that like the evidence is just abounding. That doesn't mean that there isn't complicity and direct violence that is being perpetuated in these other areas, like the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Sudan.
A death toll in the millions, perhaps up to 8 million people dead, and almost zero international interest in that conflict. That's one of the reasons why even the government of South Africa under Cyril Ramaphosa, even that government, which is not a government of the left, even that government came out in public and said, look, the war in Ukraine is not our war, it's your war, it's a European war. We're not really going to touch that. Indian government, a government of the right, has said, look, we are not prepared to condemn anybody for this because it's your war. We have our own conflicts. India has a conflict about the border with China. That's their conflict, India's conflict. Why does India need to comment on the war in Ukraine? Right now, the president of Cuba, Miguel Diaz-Canel, is in Moscow. Similar noises from Latin America. This is a European war. This is not the world's war. I'm starting here because it's an interesting phenomenon. This idea that people in places all around the world must have an opinion on something that is directly to do with Europe. In other words, Europe's history, again, makes a claim to being universal history, whereas the history of, say, the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Congolese people, have no claim to universal history. Why isn't Europe convulsed by those events in the DRC? The Cubans might turn around and say, look, every year at the United Nations, 183, 185 countries vote to end the US unilateral blockade of Cuba, an act of war since 1960, a war that the United States has prosecuted all these decades. They might turn around and say, we belong in universal history. Why is it that we have to now comment on Europe's history, but Europe is uninterested in us? We are not, our human rights are not there to be defended and so on. This is the prevailing new wave, prevailing mood now, wave of this mood, wave saying that, we are not interested in actually accepting that your history is universal history. I would like to underline this. It's very interesting that you see this, from the left, that is to say the government in Cuba, all the way to the right, the government in India, across the global south, in other words, formerly colonized parts of the world. Countries are just saying, to quote from Black Panther #1, not today, colonizer, not today. Actually, the most striking expression of this comes from the Indian foreign minister, Mr. Jaishankar, who said very clearly, when asked, when challenged, when told actually by a reporter, why doesn't India stop buying oil from Russia, was actually scolded by the Western reporter. He was quite calm in the way he is, and he replied by saying, I've been looking into this, he said, and the oil that India buys in a month, Europe buys in an afternoon from Russia. He said, think about it. And I thought that kind of measured attitude is essentially a paraphrase of that, emblematic expression, not today, colonizer, not interested in being bullied by you, but being told by you what I should do. One saw this at the G20 in Bali, Indonesia, an attitude from heads of states not to kowtow to Joe Biden or to Justin Trudeau. The scolding that Justin Trudeau received from Xi Jinping, which was widely circulated across the South, and I dare say across sections of the North as well, where Xi Jinping basically told him, you behave like a schoolboy when it comes to diplomacy, and Justin Trudeau had to skulk off after making those comments. There's a new mood. What is this mood? Can we characterize it as a mood of a residue of anti-colonialism, perhaps, some kind of residue? Not to say that these governments are necessarily governments of the people or governments of the left or anything. As I said, Mr. Modi's government in India, a neo-fascist government. Nonetheless, this is the prevailing mood. It has to be mentioned. Add to this the fact that the French have been booted out of Mali, out of Guinea. When Emmanuel Macron went to Oran in Algeria, he was jeered, he was booed. People said, get out of here, France. Macron had to jump into his car and make a quick escape. A new attitude. In fact, now the European countries, including the United Kingdom, are trying to regroup in West Africa and the Sahel region. You might want to know that one of your high officials has gone to Accra, Ghana, to basically lay out an agenda with the Accra Initiative, which is supposed to substitute for the various other plans and plots that the Europeans have had for that Sahel region of Africa and West Africa. Your Minister of State for Defense, James Heapy, is there in Accra trying to push the Accra Initiative as a substitute. In other words, not today, colonizer is the vibe from the street, but this doesn't stop the old colonial past from constantly trying to reinstate their authority. Now, of course, banding about terms such as human rights and that other people are
I need to step
Russians,
out for a
Chinese,
sec,
and
but
so
I'll
on.
be
Let's
right
forget
back.
about the imperialism of Europe or of the United States. Let's ensure that for whether propaganda purposes or purposes of their own clarity, they would like the world to believe that the only imperialists on the planet today are in Beijing or in Moscow. The old imperialism, which morphed into neocolonialism, that should be forgotten. That's the prevailing mood. Well, let's now come back to the question of theory a little bit. You see, until about the 1980s, around the time of the great debt crisis that racked the third world, bankrupted several countries, including Mexico, 1982, went into a serious debt situation from which it has barely recovered, if you're honest about it. During the time of the debt crisis, as the Soviet Union was weakening, as we began to see an attack being launched by the Western warrior states against countries, in Central America, the coup in Burkina Faso against Thomas Sankara in 1987 and so on, right through the 1980s, in the Western academic centers, ideas of anti-imperialism began to lose focus. In fact, it began to be a term, imperialism, that evoked a lot of eye rolling, as if it was an anachronistic term. We began to hear new words, in other words, in a substitution, talking about globalization, the flatness of the world, that in the World Trade Organization set up in 1994, all countries will have a kind of equivalence, that the term imperialism, the concept imperialism, the structure of imperialism, it's not something to bother oneself with. There was a sustained attack at Marxism in this period, led, I'm afraid, by a publisher in London, that is to say, New Left Books, now Verso Books, which published a book by Ernesto Laclau and Chantal Mouffe in 1985 called Hegemony and Socialist Strategy, which I think mischievously utilized the work of Antonio Gramsci to make an attack at Marxism, to in fact champion something they call post-Marxism. post-structuralism, post-Marxism, post-colonialism. This becomes the flavor of the academic literature coming out of Western countries from the 1980s. Scholars of the left, many of them either went into retreat, producing empirical work of one kind or the other, but didn't want to frontally challenge these schools of thought. Particularly after the Soviet Union, there was a great weakness in our ability to fight back against this denigration of Marxism in the name of post-Marxism. My great comrade who died last year, Ejaz Ahmed, who died this year, earlier this year, Ejaz Ahmed used to say that all this talk of post-Marxism is actually pre-Marxist, that Laclau and Mouffe, in fact, returned to the texts before Marxism, a kind of idealism. When they talk about agency and the subject and so on, they have basically walked away from the structuring impact of political economy and returned to a pre-Marxist time. They've, in fact, not gone beyond Marxism, but gone back to a time before Marxism. So interesting observation, and I'd like to just leave that there. Okay, so what to do with the fact that there's rising inequalities between North and South, between the fact that poverty rates increased in many parts of the world, despite the fact that industrial plants were exported from the center of the world economy, Europe and North America, to other parts of the world. Now, one has to understand that the industrialization that was part of the agenda of the anti-colonial movement in an earlier period was not industrialization piecemeal. It was industrialization whole hog, so that you could produce national economies, regional economies, you could improve and diversify economies out of a kind of one-crop colonial economy. That was the agenda from the earlier period when they said we must have import substitution, industrialization. It wasn't just to have a factory in the country, it was actually to change the balance of forces in the world economy, in the structured world economy, structured by imperialism. But now, in this era of globalization, as you saw factories be disarticulated, you didn't get a whole car company moving from Germany to India. What you got is a tire factory or a transmission belt factory, or you got somebody making spark plugs. The disarticulation of production was what got globalized. Globalization effectively wasn't that industry spread around the world. It's that these disarticulated forms of manufacturing spread around the world. So all of this happened at a time when Marxism was extremely weak and in a way had been put into the back seat. And you got from the camp of Marxism, the old Marxists produced a work such as Antonio Negri's book Empire, which argued that there was no real center to this empire. It was a rhizome in the way of the Felix Deleuze and Guattari's work on rhizomes and so on. That this was a kind of postmodern economy. It was not an economy with a center and so on. Forget the fact that the city of London or that Wall Street or that the Finanzplatz in Frankfurt continue to structure a great number of parts of the global supply chain. Forget the fact that the new international property rules set in place in the World Trade Organization allowed firms such as Apple to basically not produce anything. Apple doesn't make any computers or anything. Those are made in disarticulated factories by Foxconn and other companies, and Apple merely makes money on rent. It basically makes money on its patent. This was extraordinarily a period of some confusion for people. Even David Harvey writing, I think, quite pointedly saying that, well, the evidence for imperialism is not there because foreign direct investment has increased in the South and you have industrialization in the South. But that was just looking at one indicator, foreign direct investment flows or the growth of industrialization, of manufacturing capacity. It wasn't looking at the structure of the world system as a totality and trying to understand how these countries, even India, despite the major advances made by sections of the population, continued to be structured into a position of subordination. This was all not seen very clearly. And in the middle of this, the energy that would have perhaps gone towards trying to analyze the new kind of colonial tentacles and so on, that energy was dissipated. And it became, in a sense, like much of what post-structuralist thought had done, it became kind of culturalist. In other words, looking for the cultural subordination of people by others. What multiculturalism had done inside the metropolitan countries to take out, in a way, the questions of race as a structuring principle in the economy, the structure of racism, rather than look at that, look at attitudes and behaviors and so on. That if you could have seminars for people and they stop behaving like a racist, well, that's enough. Train the police to sensitize themselves to black youth, and then they'll stop shooting black youth. Not allowing us to think about the fact that the shooting of black youth in London, for instance, isn't about attitude and behavior alone, but those attitudes and behavior are structured into the political economy, and that has to be understood in a deep way. In the same way as multiculturalism basically took the guts out of an anti-colonial, anti-racist critique. In
It's
the same
political
way, at
and
the global level,
cultural.
you had the arrival of post-colonial thought and also decoloniality. In other words, let's look at power, let's look at culture, but let's not look at the political economy that structures everyday life and behavior and reproduces the colonial mentality. That has to be off the table. So we entered into this kind of academic morass where Marxism, in a sense, was not permitted to enter. Giant sign at the door of the academy. Marxism cannot come in unless it wants to slink in through a little mouse hole and just stay there as a cottage industry in a campus where there's one nutcase Marxist professor allowed per university, just in order to say that we allow diverse views. But Marxism actually must remain there inside that little mouse hole and can't have the confidence to launch an attack at the mainstream thinking. Radicalism then appears as multiculturalism or as decoloniality, as decolonial thought and so on. But God forbid you ask questions about the mining of coltan in the Congo. God forbid you ask questions about copper mining in Zambia, transfer payments, the theft of the wealth of the people, that 60% of the children who live above the seam of copper in the copper belt region of Zambia can't read. Those questions can't be on the table. Eyes will roll, if not heads. Eyes will roll in the seminar room and the heads may roll if that mouse-like Marxist academic tries to get out of their little lane and challenge people. In particular, your contract may not be renewed. That was the state of affairs until recently, and in fact, even now. And therefore, what I'm trying to suggest in these brief remarks is there's a disconnect. The contradictions of actual human processes has produced a situation where you get from Cuba to India, country governed by the left, socialist experiment in Cuba, to a neo-fascist government. You got a new mood of anti-colonialism. But of course, intellectual thought, particularly in the Western warrior states, just doesn't know how to tackle this, how to understand this. Eyes are rolling again. And then, of course, heads may roll. You can get cancelled on Twitter and so on if you don't toe the party line. Party line being, it's okay to talk about attitudes and behavior. Can't talk about structured wholes, the structured political economy, which has immense effects in social and cultural life and so on. Now, let me just make 3 quick points, and I'm looking forward to hearing Mary on this, but 3 quick points. The retrieval of Marxism into this domain, the retrieval of our tradition is very important. That's the first thing. We have to go back. We have to read the national liberation Marxists of an earlier period. Go back and read, Kwame Nkrumah's terrific book from 1965, Neocolonialism. You see, it's one thing people are reading Walter Rodney now, and I'm happy for that because Rodney is a key figure in this. But before Rodney was Nkrumah, Nkrumah theorized the emergence of neocolonialism in his 1965 book. We have to go back and read Ho Chi Minh. We have to read EMS Namboodiripad. We have to read Fidel Castro, seriously engage with Castro's thinking on some of these issues. I think that's the first thing, is that we've got to go back and create a new tradition. Our Marxism is not a Marxism which is Marxology, going back constantly to get quotations from Marx. We have to also look at how Marxism had life breathed into it by Lenin, by the great Marxists in the colonized world. As I said, all the way from Jose Carlos Mariátegui in the Andes to Ho Chi Minh to Tan Malaka. We have to go and recover this tradition. That's one of the tasks of our Institute Tricontinental. We are very keen on the recovery of this tradition as much
He's
as possible.
addressing
Secondly, we have to
decolonizing Marxism itself by actually bringing in more thinkers who are not just white.
Where's the apology for that? The Jallianwala Bagh campaign that was led by the Indian Workers Association, such a key campaign. Every British person who is sensitive should be part of this campaign to demand that young children learn about the actual history of British imperialism. Can't sanitize Churchill. If you don't face up to the past, you'll repeat it constantly. You'll repeat it constantly. And the fact that the Tory government, from whether it's Boris Johnson, good God, that guy, all the way out to now Rishi Sunak, the fact that Sunak can give a speech recently where he said that Britain has always fought for freedom. I mean, for God's sake, Britain only understood freedom because we all fought against British imperialism. Britain doesn't understand freedom. If it understood freedom, it would have had a different history. For God's sake, let's be honest. And to have Rishi Sunak say that just yesterday is a sign that history is not being taught in the way it must be taught. So that's the next thing. First, recover our tradition. Second, we should fight to have the actual history of imperialism taught. I'm very glad Tariq Ali wrote that book on Churchill, and I hope that everybody has read it. It's written in the classic Tariq Ali style. It's casual and biting, and Churchill deserves it. That's the biographer of Churchill you need. Not some Tory MP who writes a 3-volume book on Churchill on the side, actually written by some interns and so on. We don't need that. We need an actual story about Churchill. Third, the structure of imperialism today. I mean, when are we going to come to terms with the fact that imperialism reproduces itself constantly? The city of London is a criminal venture. It's a mafia place where mining companies, Canadian mining companies, domicile themselves. In Britain, you right now have a debate about non-dom status and paying taxes. The non-doms are not paying tax. I mean, come on, for God's sake, the whole city of London is a non-dom place of transnational corporations. And you're talking about non-dom like you're being so high and mighty, but not allowing into that debate the fact that the city of London is a non-dom location. Bring the city of London into international law. Don't allow secret corporations to incorporate there and basically transfer profits out of places where they're extracting minerals without paying the high royalties that they should be paying. It's very interesting that Indonesia recently put on the table to create a nickel cartel, asking Canada to join. I don't think Canada is going to join, doesn't have the stomach for it. But it's interesting that we're back to cartelization of raw materials, and let's see where that goes. So the third issue is, let's talk again about structure. Let's talk about how the global economy is actually structured. How, for instance, it's not Chinese companies that are out there, alone exploiting African workers and so on. What about the Canadian companies? 60% of the world's mining companies are Canadian. No light is shone on them. Just because Justin Trudeau is some sort of dauphin, child prime minister, doesn't mean that the country of Canada should get a free pass. Canada led, by the way, the attempt to overthrow the government of Hugo Chavez of Venezuela.
Calling him a child prime minister is so funny.
To conduct that coup in 2002. Also, Canada's role in Haiti, unremarked, but should be. The role of the United States in Haiti in recent years, horrendous. The structure needs to be looked at honestly and clearly. And by the way, most of the things we do at Tricontinental on the structure, we get the evidence directly from World Bank, IMF, and UN reports. You don't need to even go further than the mainstream. The material is there. It's just that the epistemology used to look at that material is actually quite, in my opinion, childish. It's idealistic, perhaps. Okay, fourth and last, mentality. It's interesting. There is a kind of battle of ideas, what the phrase Fidel used in the early 2000s and late 90s, around how we understand the world, mentality, the colonial mentality, this idea that you can lecture countries around the world about how and what they should be doing. Very interesting. Just because Rishi Sunak is of South Asian origin doesn't make him anything other than a prime minister of the British ruling class. If he's a prime minister of the British ruling class, the fact of his origin is hardly going to change the way people in India see another British prime minister.
What are people doing? How are they acting? Which policies are they advocating for?
Out there telling other people what to do. That has to be also put on the table, and it has to be exposed for what it is. Look at it like this. At COP26 in Glasgow, Western warrior states were chiding India, China, other countries for using coal. Now, because they are refusing to allow the war in Ukraine to come to a close, they are talking about opening coal-fired power plants in Germany, maybe even in the UK. Well, too bad. Thatcher destroyed much of that possibility. I don't know, maybe you'll open up your minds again. But just a year ago, Western warrior states, high and mighty, stop using coal. A year later, let's use coal. This is the colonial mentality. What's okay for the Western warrior states is not permitted for the formerly colonized world. That attitude has to be exposed for what it is. Let's not forget what they just said a year ago. That was just a year ago. Okay, friends, I'm going to wind up here because the point I wanted to make is that we have now slowly a shift in the mood. People are not interested in saying the prolongation of a colonial attitude. At least at the level of attitude, there's a shift. We know also that our concepts to handle neocolonialism today have been worn down, partly because at least a generation, if not two generations, of academics globally have been afraid to launch a full-fledged, attack, anti-colonial attack on the world system from a Marxist perspective. We just haven't seen it in the way that we needed to, for whatever reasons. And I tried to give you a few. It's not a complete sociology of knowledge, but it's at least a few indicators. And finally, these 4 points, recovering the national liberation heritage, insisting that the actual history of colonialism be on the table, trying to construct a more honest and true account of the structure of neocolonialism today. And finally, being very precise in exposing the colonial mentality that seems to saturate, television channels like BBC and so on. A colonial attitude to the world has to be exposed. We've got to recover decolonization into the Marxist paradigm. Cannot allow it to slip out there and become part of this culturalist pre-Marxist forms of thinking. We've got to take that stuff back. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Vijay. I don't know if you could hear the applause, but anyway, thank you. I'm going to hand over to Mary now.
Have our screen and that screen up as well. Anybody know how I do that?
I love how his perspective is like how I originally introduced this video. It's decolonizing Marxism, but the Marx Memorial Library is saying it's decolonization via a Marxist lens. So like, oh, we can decolonize through Marxism, and that is true, but also he's providing a critique of Marxism, which they are not particularly liking, which is necessary, especially for white people to be listening to this, to actually be engaging in a critical manner that is good faith and necessary in talking about all of these internalized prejudices that are perpetuated through capitalism, but must be dealt with if anyone wants to consider themselves a leftist. As I have said, we need to be redefining what leftism means, that it not only is from this anti-capitalist marker that many people hold, but it must be anti-colonial, anti-ableist, anti-racist, anti-queerphobic, anti-sexist, that anti-xenophobic, that it's like all of these things go into what it means to actually be pro-human, not pro-life, because all of that co-opting of bullshit conservative language is like just inherently bad faith, is like to actually be for human dignity, for all human dignity. That must be the hallmark of leftism. Otherwise, we are going to continue to just erode these movements, spinning our wheels, going in circles without having any sort of meaningful moving of the needle because of people, especially when it comes to white leftists, getting in the way when we're talking about collective liberation, and also not taking these critiques. The rich content informing this argument. I don't know what the rest of this video is. Is he taking questions?
Takeover. You'll find us, we're at the top, aren't we?
Has never really recognised, because it's an anti-Marxist or even pre-Marxist, what... yeah, go on. Do you want your waving? Do you want to say something to that?
No. I just said your audio is going in and out for me. Just repeat the immediate last thing you said after pre-Marxist.
Well, this is where Marxism is so important, as you've said, because...
Okay, maybe we'll finish that tomorrow. We'll see if they like have some bullshit that they are getting into. Which, most likely that is the case because of how they have framed the title of the video. But I did want to show at least part of this conversation that I brought up a little bit ago of this communist professor actually talking to a socialist that he is calling him a reactionary socialist. And I think that's a pretty accurate marker. From what I've seen, I've only seen like 3 minutes of it. Wait, not sleep. Playback speed. Here we go.
Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm Dr. Astar Bear.
I am here for a special live stream. I am debating a fellow named Hayes, who I call a reactionary socialist. I don't know what he calls himself. I guess we're going to find out. Look, he's here now. So welcome to my guest here, Hayes. We're going to have a debate tonight about a variety of different topics. I see this lasted 1 hour. We haven't communicated too much about the dimensions of this beforehand. That's never great. But here we are. And since we don't know each other very well, I'd like to start by just asking you a couple of questions about your politics, because I find it hard to parse just from the look that I've taken at some of your stuff. Do you mind if I ask you, do you support China? Do you see China as an imperialist power?
No.
No what?
It's not an imperialist power.
Okay, fair enough. Do you see it as a socialist country?
Yes.
All right, that's a good start. We're in agreement on that point then. What about the USSR? Is that a country and history and legacy that you uphold? Do you find yourself closer to the position of like Stalin killed 100 million people or Stalin did nothing wrong?
I'm a Stalinist, 100% Stalinist.
All right. Well, I see some overlap there as well. Over the last summer, I sort of became known as this, right? Dr. Stalin. And what about when it comes to more social issues? I noticed on your Substack, you have a kind of rejection of woke culture, but I'm having a hard time understanding what that means. Do you support, for example, say a woman's right?
As we were talking about what it even means to be woke, as we're decolonizing things, this comes from AAVE, African American Vernacular English, of talking about being woke, like to all of these oppressive structures that, of course, the fascists who are overtly fascist, like who are right wing, they are like, oh, wokeism. That's inherently anti-black. Okay, that is demeaning this language that has been used to talk about liberation and these oppressive structures. So, like, just calling that out. So it's never a good start for someone to be like, oh, I'm not for all like these woke things, these like culture war things. That's like, what you are calling a culture war is based in human rights. It's diminishing the weight of the harm being done. So I watched up to here, like right after he replied to this, and I was like, oh boy, I don't know who this person is, but he's very annoying to me.
To choose.
For abortion?
Yeah.
I think this is a poorly constructed question. Women's right to choose unconditionally does not exist anywhere in the world. Maybe Sweden is an exception. Even in liberal Europe, there's not an unconditional right to choose at any stage.
That wasn't the question. Saying it's a poorly constructed question is so stupid. It seems like he's trying to just like debate semantics rather than actually engaging with like the heart of the issue.
Broadly speaking, I'm not against abortion, but I reject this dichotomy between completely unrestricted abortion, even 8 months in, and completely banning it entirely.
Okay, so you'd favor some restrictions, is that right?
I think that's mainly women's business to sort amongst themselves. The women who are against abortion really are not being given fair representation because they are a big contingent of women who are against abortion.
What? That is wild. That is a wild thing to say. There is like a lot of research to show that these anti-abortion people who are claiming to be pro-life, that their numbers are greatly inflated with like how often they are heard from, their presence on the internet, like many of these like other types of like Nazi bots, that it's like they aren't real people. There's this over-representation, and that is consistent with right-wing ideology and having them be visible.
Personally, I would not know when to restrict it, but I just realize that it's normal for most countries to have some restrictions on when you can get.
So if you don't know, then how can you have like an opinion about it? Ugh, this shit is so annoying.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me a little bit problematic when you start saying, well, you explain yourself, right? Like we don't typically have that, like if we take the position that abortion is healthcare, for example, you don't typically say like, why do you want a healthcare procedure, right? Like, but if you're putting restrictions on it, then all of a sudden you do have to explain, right? Because they're like, okay, why do you want?
Can you name me communist states that have no restrictions?
Well, I mean, we're not talking about other.
He is such like a literal communist rather than like developing like his own or claiming to be a communist. He's so literal and like, this is like, we have to talk about it like as it has happened in the world rather than talking about like, okay, what do you think it to mean? Not what has already been defined for you. Are you doing any sort of like critical analysis as to like what it means to you personally?
States, we're talking about what our states.
Yeah, I'm a communist though, so
yeah.
I would agree that communist states are oppressing women by restricting abortion to some extent.
Okay, well that's fair. What about, what about something like gay rights? I mean, like when you go out of your way to reject woke culture, and people might think, well, maybe you just sort of hate gays. I mean, is that the case, or how would you describe your politics when it comes to LGBTQ rights and so forth?
I don't hate LGBT people, but I recognize the interest group. I'm against the interest group called the LGBT movement. Yeah, it's completely anti-communist, has historically always served an anti-communist role, serves the establishment, is in bed with the NGOs, the Democratic Party, and the agenda of the ruling class. They're the ones who are establishing it as an interest group.
There is a difference between queer liberation, the queer liberation movement, and also like it being co-opted like any sort of movement by the nonprofit class. You're about to get destroyed. Restricting abortion puts women's lives at risk. Women don't get abortions that late unless they need it. Yeah, oh boy, here we go. Yeah, if you don't fucking know, then you shouldn't have a say.
I do think people should have rights to privacy and be left alone because of their sexuality and so on and so on. However, I don't agree that there should be a alignment between a communist movement and a so-called LGBT movement.
Do you know like who spearheads a lot of these movements who don't get credit? Queer people, especially queer people of color, queer women of color, gender expansive people, trans people.
Given the amount of exclusion of, groups like, for example, gays and lesbians in so many different social movements, right? Political
For
movements.
example?
Well, I mean, pretty much anything you could name, right, is exclusionary towards gays, except for like the gay rights movement itself,
I disagree.
But,
Yes. There's gay people in the Republican Party.
have been excluded from certain occupations, for example, right?
Which ones?
He's talking about... I hate this. I don't know if I can actually finish this. This is so annoying. Who is this guy? Yeah, substantiate those points. He just is like wanting to like debate rather than... This is why I could never be a debater. I'm not a debater at heart. It's like I would rather have like a dialogue with someone than like debate them on their ideas of like nitpicking every little thing that's like, okay, you aren't engaging in like the substance of what we're even trying to talk about. Rainbow capitalism isn't the same as fighting for queer rights. Yes. The Dems might gesture towards it, but I don't think they tangibly support queer anything. Yeah. So no intersectionality. Yeah.
Really? You're unaware of that?
Today, which ones are gay people excluded from?
The question is, given the legacy of exclusion, if you're not inclusive,
he's always like, prove me wrong. He wants to, rather than substantiating his own claims and like basing it in fact, he's wanting to just like say things and then be proven wrong. That is like such an idiotic perspective to take.
Are you being exclusionary, right? And
I'm
that
asking
is the
which
perception.
occupations are exclusive only to straight people in America today.
Well, you have to do your own homework on that. But that is
Jamie Brown restricting doesn't outright mean. What are you talking about? That's not what they were talking about when USSR banned it. They just banned unconditional abortions. Has is a lieutenant from the patriarchal socialist hierarchy. Uh-huh. Totally. Mass reductionism.
Right? I mean, like, really? Okay, all right.
No, that's what you're implying. You can't name any, so I guess.
Do you think there were 50 years ago?
Probably.
No. What might be something you should look into?
He just looks like he's
given that there is clearly a legacy of exclusion.
He just looks like he is like coming into like fight, which I know many people are like, that's what a debate is. But like, can we not have a discussion on like what this type of ideology even means?
Right. The question
How does that
is,
manifest itself?
I'm not familiar with either of these people, by the way. I just happened to come across this when I was wanting to do more, show more educational videos on reactionary socialism. But, this is a really great representation in practice.
Does that, are gays and lesbians, might they see the communist movement?
Didn't you say you're known as Dr. Stalin?
Right. Are we cutting off a contingency here? When really, I think we should be trying to like embrace all parts of the working class, right?
Mm-hmm. There's no reason to ban abortion for any reason. Women only get late-term abortions when they need it. It doesn't need to be regulated. Oh, from that one above. That's the same person. I didn't realize. Us needs to consider the material reality of the U.S., not say, well, socialist countries don't do that, so no. Yeah, exactly. There is Hobbes' case that denies gay shoppers. Is this an interview or debate? Intersectionality is just liberal Marxism. What? Intersectionality, even though I hate people sometimes. It's so annoying. I can't watch this. I have to stop. He needs to put some respect in his mouth. Yeah. Hello, little boy. Listen. Just because liberals have co-opted a lot of language that has come from revolutionaries, particularly leftist, what it actually means in my mind to be leftist, for collective liberation, not just for some of the people that you were like, well, if this happened in history, then that means it's correct. So you don't think it's okay to question certain movements and how they happened, how they ended up falling? Maybe it's because they engage in some of this, like these sweeping generalizations, not willing to take criticism and actually engage with intersectionality, good sir. That's like intersectionality was coined by, oh boy. I'm starting to mix up people in my head. By a black queer woman, I believe. Okay, so I was going to say Kimberly Crenshaw, and then I didn't, and then I was like, I don't think it was Octavia Butler, and I also don't think it was Bell Hooks. Okay. I need to just trust myself. But yeah, it's like, and just because like that particular term was coined doesn't mean like by a particular people, and in this case Kimberly Crenshaw is credited, like it doesn't mean that like these concepts haven't existed before that.
The Republican Party is Christian and conservative, and they have gay people in the Republican Party.
They have a few, right?
And also, didn't you say
is that party widely favored? I mean, does that matter? You know,
hold on, didn't you
is
say
the
you're
Republican Party widely favored by LGBTQ folks?
Sorry?
Is the party widely favored by LGBTQ folks? I don't think so.
Among gay men, it's starting to.
Maybe among the most privileged segment.
Then it's only a matter. I mean, with
the white ones.
There's Blair White now, so it's only a matter of time. There's even transgender conservatives now. So anyway, my question to you is: you say your name was Dr. Stalin, something like this. You claim I'm a reactionary socialist when my views on this matter are more liberal.
Well, acting like the most reactionary you could ever imagine while being like, you're calling me a reactionary socialist, how dare you, like in the most reactionary manner is just crazy. Okay, I have to stop that. That's giving me a headache. This is why I was not on the debate team. No, thank you. It's almost like wanting to argue for argument's sake, which I know, like, people who are actually in debating in good faith might be yelling at me for that. Rather than actually having, like, a discussion, I think that's, like, largely more helpful in actually exposing people for their horrible takes. And also, you can approach that in a good faith manner. I mean, if they're willing to engage in a good faith manner and have something that doesn't come across as quite as threatening, that may actually change their opinion sometimes. Not always, and that's not why we should be engaging in dialogue per se, but like actually holding space for people and what they have to say. I hated that. Okay. So this is getting into the reading. This is Critical-Utopian Socialism and Communism. And then, so this is the third part of socialist and communist literature. And then we will get into tomorrow, part 4, position of the communists in relation to the various opposition parties. So there we go. We do not here refer to that literature, which in all great revolutions has expressed the demands of the proletariat, the writings of Babeuf, etc. The first direct efforts of the proletariat to attain its own ends, made in times of general agitation in the period of the overthrow of feudal society, necessarily failed, owing as much to the undeveloped state of the proletariat itself, as to the absence of the economic conditions for its emancipation, which conditions could only be the product of the bourgeois epoch. Yeah, so talking about, like, not having as many, like, organizing mechanisms themselves, like, these avenues to actually be organizing, a large part of that being like spaces and free time, and I mean, I guess that falls in like the economic part of it as well. Means of communication, but then also this second part, the economic conditions of like having the free time to do so, not like making people so they're working all the time so they can't actually be organizing, and also like having money to get this organizing done, which is why strike funds are so important, and mutual aid, which I do have this link. Let me show. If you are interested, the Utah Workers Center, they do some really great work. And you can donate to them. I know that there are probably places that are close to you, wherever you are located, that you can donate to that helps with organizing. But they help people actually get the kind of education and information that they need to organize their workplaces in particular. So I'm going to drop this in the chat. If you are interested in donating, able, so that people can actually build up strike funds where not everyone's money is going towards just living, paying to survive this capitalist hellscape, but also to provide for organizing and, you know, helping people actually get to meetings and having like the resources to do picketing and such. And especially like if people are going to strike, that they actually have like a mutual aid strike fund to be pulling from, so people can actually work and still get the money that they need, still get their needs covered, so that they can withhold their labor and not just be dependent on continuing to work in order to be striking. Okay. The revolutionary literature which accompanied these first movements of the proletariat was necessarily reactionary in character. It preached universal asceticism and a crude leveling process. The genuine socialist and communist systems, the systems of Saint Simon, Fourier, Owen, etc., sprang up during the early undeveloped period of the struggle between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, which we have described above. See bourgeoisie and proletariat. The founders of these systems perceive indeed the class antagonism as well as the action of the decomposing elements in the prevailing form of society. But on the side of the proletariat, they can find no historical initiative and no independent political movement. Since the development of class antagonism keeps pace with the development of industry, they find none of the material conditions for the emancipation of the proletariat, and therefore search after a social science, social laws, in order to create these conditions. Social activity is to be replaced by their personal inventive activity, historical conditions of emancipation to be replaced by fantastical conditions, the gradual and spontaneous organization of the proletariat as a class is to be replaced by an organization of society specially invented by themselves. The future history of the world becomes, for them, the propaganda and practical application of their social plans. In the formation of their plans, they are conscious, above all, of defending the interests of the working class as being the most suffering class. Only under this aspect of being the most suffering class does the proletariat exist for them. The undeveloped state of the class struggle, as well as their own social position, cause them to fancy themselves far superior to all class antagonisms. They want to improve the conditions of all members of society, even the most favored. Yeah, rather than of like having this like buy-in into the larger system and elevating everyone, rather than being like, no, some people need to be downgraded in their positions. Hence, they appeal continually to the whole of society without distinction, and even by preference to the ruling class. For how can anyone who understands their system fail to recognize in it the best possible plan of the best possible society? They therefore reject all political, and especially all revolutionary action. They wish to attain their ends by peaceful means, and endeavor by small experiments, necessarily foredoomed to failure, and by the force of example to prepare the way for the new social gospel. And in some ways, like, this can remind me a little bit of, like, some, like, democratic socialists. I mean, and it's talking about socialists as well, but, like, just to provide a current context. Like, even the example of, like, Zoran Mamdani being able to implement a lot of socialist policies and help the working class, who is also talking about taxing the rich more. But he also comes from what may be considered the petty bourgeois, where, like, his family is, like, his dad is an academic, his mom is an artist. I happen to really enjoy her art and her film. I also kind of have a crush on Mira Nair, so mommy issues, I guess, coming out there. But it also, like, a recent example, and this isn't necessarily talking about, like, wanting everything to be better for everyone, but, like, if he was truly wanting to engage with this in a more serious manner that was built in more of, like, a communist working class perspective that was very much rooted in the proletariat, is that, like, his family members might be more subject to taxes. And so, like, maybe they would be willing to have that happen. Maybe he would be willing to have that happen, but, like, we must engage with that. Especially when considering that recently there were these, like, clinics that were created by New York City to help youth specifically, and or provide, like, more cost-effective healthcare and resources, and that trans youth were excluded from this. It was following the executive order to forbid caretakers, not caretakers, healthcare workers, and people who are actually involved in, like, serving queer youth, that they will not be able to provide the care that they should be ethically for all human beings. So, like, this is very concerning to me. I think it is alarming. It's sadly not super surprising because of, you know, some of this class, that aspect of it all. But and I don't know if I'm, like, I'm not understanding the situation exactly, but, like, that's the impression that I got, is that, like, it will be forbidden for queer youth, and that is a concession that is very dangerous, especially when, like, he got into office talking about, like, humanizing queer people, and also that, like, in these various initiatives talking about how queer youth are very targeted, not only when it comes to this fascist administration, but, like, the fascist workings of this capitalist system in America, and how, like, we cannot be ceding any ground when it comes to people's human rights, especially to queer youth who are already under attack at every turn, who might have been getting more hope while living in New York City, that they would have more of these resources that are available to them. So, like, is this a way to be a concession to the Trump administration, because, like, Zoran is somewhat in the good graces of Trump. Like, I don't know what all of this means and what it will look like in practice, but we need to be calling that out as well, that he also is not just some savior of politics, that he's a human being that comes from a particular class that may also have, like, he does have his own political ambitions, and that we must constantly be questioning the people in power and the people who are vying for these positions of power. This fantastic picture of future society, painted at a time when the proletariat was still but little developed and had but a fantastical conception of its own position, corresponds to the first instinctive aspirations of the workers towards a complete transformation of society. But these socialist and communist writings also contain a critical element. They attacked society at its very basis. Thus, they provided the most valuable materials for the enlightenment of the working class. Their positive propositions as to future society, e.g., the abolition of distinction between town and country, the family, private gain, wage labor, the proclamation of social harmony, the conversion of the state into a mere machine for the administration of production, all these propositions merely indicate the disappearance of that class antagonism that had then only just begun to develop, and which they only knew as yet in its first indistinct and undefined forms. These proposals are, therefore, a purely utopian character. The significance of critical utopian socialism and communism is in inverse proportion to historical development. In proportion as the class struggle develops and takes shape, this fantastic disdain of the struggle, these fantastic attacks upon it, lose all practical value and all theoretical justification. Therefore, while the founders of this system were revolutionary in many aspects, their disciples form mere reactionary sects, especially people who want to claim that, like, they're Marxists or communists, whatever, and not actually engage in a more, based in, as we're talking about praxis, like, actually based in their own developed theory, engaging with the actual writings. And I know a lot of the time, like, having access to free time to read, actually having access to books, like, this can be a privilege and is a privilege, that people want to co-opt the language, kind of like what they were saying of, like, liberals want to, like, they coined intersectionality. That's like, the concept of intersectionality goes beyond any sort of liberalism. It is this idea that, like, there are people who, and also negating that is a much more, like, liberal perspective to say, like, no, people don't experience more marginalization depending on, like, what kind of oppressive population they are a part of, or, like, oppressed population, I should say, are a part of. That's, like, the projection is just wild. But where was I going with that? Oh yeah, people just want to co-opt language and say, like, they're for certain types of resistance and say, like, oh, I am this label, which is also why, like, I myself, I can resist labeling myself as, like, a particular type of communist at times, which can, like, be very off-putting to many communists, where they're like, oh, so if you weren't, then that means you're a reactionary socialist, or you're, like, this type of, you are conservative, and it's like, we need to be constantly questioning what this means, because there are power structures involved in who is defining what this means, and there is a lot of co-opting of this type of language, and that, like, people have used the power that they have gained from workers, like people who have been so-called leaders of workers' movements, to do their own sort of, like, glorification and exploit workers, and also, like, abuse workers in their own way. So, like, we need to constantly be questioning people and, like, what these labels even mean, and that they are constantly being redefined, and that we should be doing our own definitions and our own redefining and engaging in what this actually means. Anyway, that's my rant. In proportion as the class struggle develops and takes shape, this fantastic disdain of the struggle, these fantastic attacks upon it, lose all practical value and all theoretical justification. Therefore, while the founders of this system were revolutionary in many respects, their disciples form mere reactionary sects. They hold fast by the old views of their masters in opposition to the historical evolution of the proletariat. Thus, they consistently endeavor to suppress the class struggle and to reconcile antagonisms. They ever dream of the experimental realization of their social utopia, of establishing isolated phalansteres. Phalansteres? I'm not familiar with that. I see a footnote below. Of founding home colonies and setting up little Icarias, duodecimo editions of the New Jerusalem, and to realize all these castles in the air, they are forced to appeal to the philanthropy of the bourgeois hearts and purses. Yeah, I was talking about philanthropy, the overseer class, like supervisors, that they are part of this middle class socialism specifically. Okay, this is what the footnote says. Owen called his communistic model societies home colonies. Phalansteres, or Phalanstère, was the name given by Fourier to his plan of social palaces. The utopian fantasy by which Cabet described his communistic institutions was called Icaria. Okay. By degrees, they fall into the category of reactionary or conservative socialists, described above, and are only distinguished from these by their more systematic pedantry, and by their fanatical and superstitious belief in the miraculous power of their social science. They therefore bitterly oppose all political action of the working class, which could only result from a blind unbelief in their new gospel. Yes, so like as I complain about like certain types of organizing and organizers, that is where that comes from, especially this conservative socialism. That is like, oh, I want to enjoy having property and access to whiteness and capital and cishet normativity, but also claim that I'm an ally, but then like when people are resisting in ways that I don't like, when they aren't really part of the working class, that like how can they actually be called the things that they are claiming to be when they act in a very different way? The Owenites in England and the Fourierists in France, Fourieristes in France, respectively, opposed the Chartists and the Reformists. So getting a little more granular in some of these categories, I've recently, as we're talking about like various types of like socialism and communism, and as people are claiming these labels, what that can mean, also like how we must constantly question who is defining these things, how people are defining it for themselves, that sometimes like they may say they are something and they don't even really understand what it means, or they are inherently coming in a bad faith manner and trying to represent themselves as something that they actually aren't, especially in practice. Is that I've recently seen a local politician who is like engaging in more organizing efforts, who can be more leftist in many ways, leftist in the way of like actually seeing, more intersectionality, understanding that there is actually having class consciousness, being more outspoken about like certain causes, but also not taking really any criticism that comes from people who are actually saying like, you can't call yourself something if you are acting in a manner that is different. And so like the way that people are reacting to things is very indicative if they are reactionary. Like, are they going to respond with emotion and constantly like trying to say like, oh, feel bad for me, or are they going to respond with an attitude of wanting to learn more, wanting to engage more, and like to actually show that they are involved in a good faith manner? And I mean, people can still be like engaging in a way like after they've been confronted that still can be manipulative and exploitative, but also understanding that, like, if you recognize that, like, the struggle goes beyond just you and your ego, that there is much less to be sensitive about. That, I mean, like, sensitive about when it comes to personal attacks, of like understanding that, like, there is something much larger that we are fighting for, and that, like, everyone should be under scrutiny when engaging in this struggle, when there are so many different types of opposition that undermine it. So there is this constant fight that is going on on the left. I mean, in any sort of like political faction, but also like why, like, coming from the perspective of politics in general, rather than like a working class struggle, or coming from like this collective liberation perspective, that it's not just happening through politics, that it needs to be happening on the ground in all sorts of ways, that it's not just political, it's also cultural, like how we have been talking about, like on Friday, of talking about cultural decolonization, that honoring culture, actually providing spaces for culture, engaging in our own humanity, providing needs for ourselves rather than relying on politicians, and just saying that, like, no type of criticism should be allowed when it comes to politicians. Like, that is inherently a more like fascist belief. So, like, we should be engaging in all kinds of criticisms. And, like, even when it comes to our own movements, or especially when it comes to our own movements that we are claiming to be passionate about and for, that, like, if people are not willing to take criticism that is good faith, and that they are just wanting to impose their own beliefs on other people, like, then, like, what are we even doing? Like, that has to be taken into account. Otherwise, like, you become part of the systems that you are claiming to be fighting against, especially when it comes to politicians. If there is someone who is, like, continually offended by, like, criticism when they are wanting to run for political office, like, they shouldn't be running for political office. Not like I even believe that much can be done when, like, having worked for the government and naively thinking, like, I could change something from the inside. It's cold, hard machinery, bitch. And it is very difficult for just individuals without engaging in more organizing, especially when it comes to organizing in the workplace. And there are many tactics that, as we were just reading, make it very difficult to do, that stifle workers and the proletariat from engaging in a manner that actually allows them to have collective bargaining power. So, anyway, I was all over the place with that. But, you know, we need to be talking about these things. Like, there is fighting, like, for a reason, because, like, we're all human beings and we all have different perspectives, and, like, we should be, like, saying, like, diversity of thought is a good thing. We should want different perspectives. But what should not be welcomed is when, like, there are people who are trying to get into positions of power who are not welcoming diversity of thought, especially when it comes from the left, when it is in good faith and they are claiming to be on the left as well. Like, so this is what I am highlighting with, like, this larger conversation with Graham Plattner and all of these, like, white streaming male edgelords who are wanting to be like, you can't criticize someone because they've reformed, because they view themselves as being similar, and centering their own egos, and centering him as this white savior, rather than actually acknowledging that, like, we should be engaging at every level criticism of our so-called leaders and representatives, because then we actually realize, if you do it in a way that is thorough and engaged in critical thinking, that it is very difficult to be a true representative, like what Marx is talking about, of the working class, without also trying to improve the conditions of the people who are oppressors. Because often those people become the oppressors. Anyway, that'll be it for me today. I did want to show the question part of that other video for decolonizing Marxism, because that's my original perception of it, I think is correct. So we'll get into that tomorrow. Maybe I'll watch ahead just so there's not like super annoying things happening that I'm like, ugh, we could actually be engaging in something that was a little more constructive. So, of course, Bounce House, thank you for being here. Thank you for watching and engaging. I appreciate you. I appreciate you all for, even tuning in to some of these chaotic rants, but sending you solidarity. I hope you have a good rest of your day, evening. Yeah, you as well. And I will see you soon. Okay, bye.